Hey guys, tonight we're plunging head first, or maybe head gently onto a feather pillow into the rather murky, often unsettling, and occasionally hilarious world of how people in Renaissance Europe tried to catch some Z's. Imagine this: you're living in, say, Florence in 1480. The air is thick with the scent of olive oil and unwashed humanity, mixed with the faint, persistent tang of wood smoke and something suspiciously close to, well, let's just say, ancient sewage. Your days are a relentless grind of either back-breaking labor in the fields, haggling in the bustling, disease-riddled marketplace, or perhaps, if you're lucky, copying manuscripts by flickering candlelight until your eyes feel like sandpaper. There's no soft mattress waiting for you, no blackout curtains, no soothing white noise machine. Instead, you're nestled, or more likely crammed into a straw-filled pallet, in a room shared with half a dozen other people, probably a few farm animals, and certainly a symphony of rustling, scuttling, and occasional squeaking from creatures unseen. The flickering hearth casts long, dancing shadows, and the chill seeps into your bones, even under a coarse wool blanket. Sleep, you find, is not a luxurious retreat, but a desperate battle against a cacophony of discomforts, anxieties, and the ever-present threat of sickness, or, let's be honest, getting robbed by a rogue pigeon. You probably won't survive this, but we'll try to get you through the night. It's a world where the lines between medicine magic and sheer desperation blurred, especially when it came to something as fundamental as a good night's rest. You might think modern insomnia is bad with its glowing screens and endless to-do lists, but trust me, your Renaissance counterpart had a whole different set of challenges. Their nights were punctuated by Bell's street criers, animal noises, and the gnawing worry of famine or plague. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'm curious, where are you tuning in from? Drop your location and local time in the comments below. Let's see who's still awake. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You might be surprised to learn that chronic sleeplessness, or insomnia as we call it today, was a recognized malady in the Renaissance. It wasn't just a minor inconvenience, it was often viewed as a symptom of deeper imbalances within the body, a sign that something was fundamentally amiss. Physicians, though still operating under the pervasive influence of humoral theory, diligently recorded cases of sleeplessness, attributing them to everything from an excess of black bile causing melancholy to an overactive brain from too much study. You see, the very act of thinking particularly deep philosophical thought was sometimes considered a potential pathway to wakefulness. So if you were a scholar burning the midnight oil, your sleepless nights weren't a badge of honor, but a medical complaint. One mainstream historical fact to anchor us here is that Renaissance medical texts, drawing heavily on ancient Greek and Roman traditions, like those of Galen and Hippocrates, contained extensive sections on sleep and its disorders. They meticulously cataloged various types of insomnia, from difficulty falling asleep to waking frequently, and even premature waking. This wasn't just anecdotal observation. It was part of a structured, if sometimes misguided, medical framework. They didn't have polysomnography labs, obviously, but they were certainly paying attention to how sleep, or the lack thereof, affected human health. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some Renaissance physicians, in their earnest attempts to understand what kept people awake, suggested that certain intense emotions or imaginative excesses could literally prevent the humors from settling, thus keeping the body in a state of agitated wakefulness. Imagine being told your overactive imagination was making you an insomniac. My dear patron, it seems your delightful penchant for daydreaming is disrupting the very humors of your brain, preventing the vital spirits from drawing inwards for repose. Perhaps fewer tales of dragons and more contemplation of turnips. It's a nice thought, though perhaps less helpful than a cup of chamomile tea. It makes you wonder if every budding artist or poet was battling chronic sleeplessness as a professional hazard. Historians still argue whether the perception of sleep quality in the Renaissance was fundamentally different from ours. Was their fragmented, often uncomfortable sleep simply accepted as the norm, or did they yearn for the uninterrupted rest that we chase today? It's hard to say for sure. We project our modern ideals of 8 uninterrupted hours onto the past, but for many in Renaissance Europe, first sleep and second sleep, often separated by a period of waking activity or even social interaction, was a common pattern. The idea of a single continuous block of sleep is, in many ways, a modern construct driven by artificial lighting and the Industrial Revolution. So when they complained of sleeplessness, were they complaining about fragmented sleep or a complete absence of it? The text suggests both. You find yourself in a world where every rustle in the straw, every creak of the floorboards, every distant bark or bray contributes to the unsettling atmosphere of the night. Your bed is often a shared space, a crude frame filled with straw, perhaps topped with a thin mattress of wool or feathers if you're wealthy, but more likely just straw. And oh, the straw, it rustles, it attracts pests, and it compresses into unforgiving lumps over time. Imagine trying to get comfortable on what feels like a bag of twigs after a long day. And the temperature, forget climate control. Drafts from ill-fitting windows or open doorways are a constant companion, especially in winter. You learn to sleep fully dressed, perhaps even with a cap pulled low over your ears just to retain a semblance of warmth. There's no escaping the environment. It's an active participant in your nightly struggle for slumber. It's easy to romanticize the past, to imagine quaint, peaceful evenings, but the reality of Renaissance sleep was often a harsh, noisy, and challenging affair. The very structure of society, the lack of sanitation, the constant threat of disease, and the absence of modern comforts all conspired against truly restful nights. You're not just battling your own internal anxieties, you're battling the very fabric of your existence. This era was a testament to humanity's enduring need for sleep and the often desperate, sometimes dangerous lengths people would go to find it. As the city finally quiets, leaving you with only the distant howl of a dog or the occasional rumble of a cart on cobblestones, your attention turns to the immediate problem: how to actually fall asleep. You've tossed and turned on your lumpy straw bed, the memories of the day's toil still echoing in your weary muscles. This is where the Renaissance pharmacopoeia, a fascinating blend of ancient wisdom folk remedies and outright quackery, steps in. Among the most common and often effective, albeit dangerous solutions, were herbal hypnotics. Forget your modern melatonin gummies. These were serious botanical concoctions, often with unpredictable results. One of the most widely recognized and potent sleep aids was the Wyopium poppy, Papaver somniferum. You wouldn't find it neatly packaged in a pharmacy. Instead, you might see it growing in a physician's garden or dried pods hanging in a local apothecary's shop. The milky latex harvested from its unripe seed capsules, which dries into raw opium, was a known sedative for centuries. A mainstream historical fact is that opium was widely used across Europe for both pain relief and to induce sleep, its efficacy undeniable, even if its addictive qualities were poorly understood. Physicians like Paracelsus, a Swiss-German physician and alchemist, even created laudanum, an opium tincture, which would become wildly popular much later. But the raw material was already in use. You might encounter it prescribed as a paregoric, a soothing mixture, or simply given as a dried paste to be consumed. The problem, of course, was dosage. Too little and it did nothing. Too much and you risked never waking up at all. It was a terrifying gamble every time. Then there was the notorious mandrake mesarine, Mandragora officinarum. You've probably heard tales of its human-like root and its screams when pulled from the earth. While the screaming part is a quirky fringe tidbit rooted in superstition and likely the result of an overactive imagination fueled by its hallucinogenic properties, its sedative effects were very real. Mandrake contains powerful tropane alkaloids like scopolamine and hyoscyamine, which can induce a deep dreamless sleep, or in higher doses, terrifying hallucinations and even death. Imagine a physician with a knowing look handing you a small vial of mandrake-infused wine, explaining that its roots were gathered under a full moon, perhaps even with a black dog tied to it to pull it from the ground. The ritual was as important as the plant itself. People truly believed the root shrieked when pulled, driving those who heard it mad. This belief, while unscientific, contributed to its mystique and paradoxically its perceived power as a remedy for desperate insomniacs. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of these powerful herbal sedatives, particularly opium and mandrake, contributed to a silent epidemic of addiction in the Renaissance. We lack the detailed medical records to quantify it, and the understanding of addiction itself was rudimentary. Was the persistent lethargy of some individuals attributed to a melancholic humor? when it was in fact withdrawal? It's a fascinating and somber question. You might also encounter hemp cannabis sativa, though its use as a sleep aid was less documented than opium or mandrake. It was more commonly used for its fibers, but its psychoactive properties were known, and some herbalists might have recommended it for relaxation or mild sedation. Imagine a local wise woman brewing you a tea from dried hemp leaves, promising gentle slumber. It wouldn't be the devil's lettuce of later moral panics, but simply another plant in the vast natural pharmacy. And then there were the lesser but still potent players. Hellebore. Both black and white was used, though primarily as a purgative for madness. Sometimes its sedative side effects were sought for extreme agitation. You wouldn't want to mess with hellebore. It was far more likely to cause violent vomiting and diarrhea than restful sleep. It was a last resort, a desperate gamble when all else failed, akin to trying to put out a fire with gasoline. And of course, valerian. Valeriana officinalis, which even today is recognized for its mild sedative properties, was present. Unlike its more dangerous counterparts, valerian would be brewed as a relatively innocuous tea. Its strong, earthy smell probably less than appealing, but its effects gentle enough not to send you spiraling into a hallucinogenic nightmare. You'd probably wrinkle your nose at the aroma thinking, this is supposed to help me sleep. Smells like old socks in a forgotten corner of the stable. But you drink it anyway, hoping for even a moment of peace. The knowledge of these plants was often passed down through generations, codified in Herbal's illustrated books, detailing plants and their medicinal uses, and disseminated by apothecaries and physicians. But without standardized dosages or a clear understanding of the plant's true chemical composition, every dose was a roll of the dice. You are trusting your life and your sanity to the expertise of someone who might understand the plant's traditional uses, but certainly not its precise pharmacology. It's like playing Russian roulette with a bouquet of flowers. You simply hope the person mixing your nighttime draft knew what they were doing and that their intentions were honorable. Sleep in this era was not just elusive, it was often a perilous pursuit. With the sun finally dipping below the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the narrow streets, you find yourself seeking something stronger than a mere herbal tea. Tonight the whispers turn to opium, not just as a plant, but as a processed substance, a potent dark resin. While we touched upon the poppy now, you'll see how its most powerful derivative became a true cornerstone of sleep management or mismanagement in Renaissance Europe. Its prevalence and varied applications are genuinely startling when you consider how tightly controlled it is today. Opium, often referred to as the tears of the poppy, was not a secret in the sense of being hidden away. Rather, its profound effects were widely known, and its use surprisingly integrated into various facets of society. A mainstream historical fact is that opium arrived in Europe via established trade routes from the Middle East and Asia, long before the East India Company's major role in the later opium trade. It was a well-traveled commodity known for centuries as a potent anodyne or painkiller and a powerful sedative. You wouldn't find it behind a locked cabinet. Instead, apothecaries openly sold it, sometimes as raw lumps, other times dissolved into tinctures or incorporated into complex medicinal compounds. Imagine strolling past a shop and seeing a chunk of this dark, sticky resin displayed right alongside jars of herbs and spices. It's jarring to consider its casual availability compared to modern pharmacies. The methods of consumption were varied. You might be instructed to simply ingest a small piece of the raw opium, perhaps dissolved in wine or water. Physicians would often create opium pills, small hand-rolled pellets of opium mixed with other ingredients like cinnamon or musk to mask its bitter taste. These weren't your sterile, manufactured capsules. These were artisanal pharmaceuticals, each batch slightly different, each dose a tiny calculated risk. The intention was clear: to dull the senses, quiet the mind, and drag you into a deep, heavy slumber that even the most persistent nightmares might struggle to penetrate. The sense of relief must have been immense for those suffering from chronic pain or severe anxiety. Now, for a quirky tidbit, beyond direct ingestion, opium found its way into some truly bizarre applications. There are accounts of it being used in corn sleeping sponges or soporific sponges for surgical procedures. These sponges, soaked in concoctions of opium, mandrake hemlock, and other potent herbs, would be held to a patient's nose and mouth, allowing them to inhale the fumes and fall into a stupor. While the intent was to provide anesthesia, the actual effectiveness varied wildly, and the line between stupor and death was incredibly fine. Imagine having a sponge reeking of bitter herbs pressed against your face, hoping to drift into unconsciousness rather than convulse or simply die. It certainly makes a visit to the dentist seem pleasant by comparison. Historians still argue whether the concept of nidiidu addiction, as we understand it today, was genuinely recognized or merely observed as a persistent malady related to specific humors. While they clearly noted dependence, the agitation and suffering when the substance was withheld, it wasn't attributed to a chemical craving in the brain, but rather to a lingering imbalance or a reawakening of some underlying melancholic state. Was the physician witnessing withdrawal and simply labeling it a fever of the brain? Or did they genuinely understand the patient was caught in opium's grip? It's a crucial distinction that impacts how we view their medical ethics and understanding. You might hear tales of merchants using opium on long, arduous journeys to suppress hunger and fatigue, or soldiers taking it before battle to dull the fear of pain. It wasn't just for the infirm or insomniac. It was a tool for endurance, a way to override the body's natural signals of discomfort. But the cost, of course, was immense. The lethargy, the constipation, the increasingly desperate need for more of the substance, these were all side effects that users eventually faced. Yet for many a night of peaceful, albeit drugged sleep was worth almost any price, especially when faced with the relentless anxieties of Renaissance life. Consider the domestic scene: a mother desperate for a few hours of quiet might give a restless child a small dose of poppy milk, a mild infusion of poppy seeds, or perhaps a diluted opium solution. While seemingly benign, the risk of accidental overdose in infants whose systems are far more sensitive was ever present. This was not negligence. It was a desperate attempt to bring peace to a household driven by a profound lack of understanding of pharmacokinetics. You might witness a child sleeping soundly, their breathing shallow, while the parents, exhausted but relieved, finally catch a moment of rest themselves. It's a poignant reminder of the harsh realities and limited options available to people in that era. The widespread use of opium underscores a key characteristic of Renaissance medicine: its pragmatic approach to efficacy. If something worked, even if the mechanism was unknown and the side effects severe, it was employed. The relief it offered from pain and sleeplessness was so profound that its downsides were often overlooked or simply accepted as the price of comfort. You are not simply observing history here. You are witnessing a desperate, often dangerous embrace of one of humanity's most ancient and powerful sedatives. It was a tool of both salvation and slow destruction, depending on the hand that wielded it and the body that received it. As the opium begins to take its heavy hold, dulling the sharp edges of your day, your mind might still wander to another plant, one steeped in even deeper layers of myth and dread: mandrake. We touched on its sedative properties briefly, but now you'll truly uncover the bizarre beliefs surrounding this root, its potent hallucinogenic effects, and the almost supernatural reverence it commanded as a sleep-inducing myth. It's a plant that blurs the line between botanical medicine and sheer terrifying folklore. You can almost feel the chill of the earth as you imagine a local herbalist, perhaps a bit wild-eyed and whisper-thin, recounting tales of how mandrake roots, often shaped uncannily like a human figure, were believed to shriek when pulled from the soil. This isn't just a quirky fringe tidbit. It was a deeply ingrained superstition that dictated how the plant was harvested. People genuinely believed that the sound of a mandrake being uprooted would cause madness or even death to anyone who heard it directly. So a common practice, as mentioned earlier, was to tie a dog to the plant, offering the poor animal as a sacrifice to the screaming root. The dog would be starved for days, then tantalized with food placed just out of reach, forcing it to yank the mandrake free as it lunged. Imagine the scene: a desperate person driven to the brink by sleeplessness, performing this macabre ritual under the pale moonlight, hoping that the planned sacrifice would bring them peace, not torment. It's grisly, it's bizarre, and it speaks volumes about the lengths people would go to for relief. The belief wasn't entirely unfounded in a strange, twisted way. Mandrake contains powerful alkaloids such as scopolamine, hyoscyamine, and atropine. These compounds are anticholinergic, meaning they block certain neurotransmitters in the brain and can induce a range of effects from profound sedation and amnesia to vivid hallucinations, delirium, and even coma, and death in higher doses. So while the root didn't literally scream the effects of the plant, could certainly make you feel as though you were going mad or induce a state so deep it resembled death. A mainstream historical fact is that mandrake was indeed used as an anesthetic in ancient and medieval surgery, and its potent sedative properties were well documented by Renaissance physicians who recognized its power even if they didn't understand its chemical composition. They knew it put people out one way or another. Historians still argue whether the perceived magical properties of plants like mandrake were a deliberate fabrication by charlatans or a genuine attempt by early healers to explain very real but otherwise inexplicable physiological effects. Was the screaming root merely a dramatic flourish to enhance its mystique and value, or a desperate attempt to contextualize the terrifying delirium it could induce? It's hard to untangle true belief from calculated showmanship in this era. So how did you, the sleepless Renaissance individual, encounter this terrifyingly powerful plant? It wasn't typically chewed raw, though some desperate souls might have tried it. More often it was prepared as an infusion in wine, or as an ingredient in a more soporific sponge, like the one we mentioned previously. A few drops of mandrake-infused wine taken before bed promised a heavy, dreamless slumber, but the margin for error was razor thin. Too little, and you might experience a dry mouth, blurred vision, and a racing heart, the milder effects of its alkaloids. Too much, and you could easily slip into a dangerous delirium marked by terrifying visions, confusion, and an elevated heart rate. You might wake up hours later drenched in sweat, unsure if you'd truly been asleep or trapped in a waking nightmare, convinced you'd visited the underworld. The plant's strong association with witchcraft and dark arts also complicated its medical use. While some physicians bravely prescribed it, many common folk might have sought it from a local cunning woman or hedge witch, further embedding it in the realm of forbidden knowledge. Imagine being so desperate for sleep that you risk not only poisoning yourself, but also inviting suspicion of dabbling in sorcery. Your desperate quest for slumber could easily lead to accusations of heresy. Beyond the medical text, mandrake featured heavily in popular folklore and literature. Shakespeare, for instance, mentions its shrieks in Romeo and Juliet. This cultural omnipresent despite its real-world dangers highlights how deeply embedded this plant was in the Renaissance psyche. It was a plant of extremes, extreme danger, extreme relief, and extreme superstition. It was the ultimate double-edged sword in the fight against sleepless nights. You might find yourself staring at a small dried piece of mandrake root, contemplating its gnarled, almost human shape, and wondering if the cure was truly worth the potential madness. The irony, of course, is that the very substance meant to bring you peace could unleash chaos within your mind. It was a potent symbol of humanity's desperate struggle against the night, a silent scream of its own against the tyranny of sleeplessness. Having flirted with the hallucinogenic depths of mandrake, you now turn your gaze to another plant, one perhaps more commonly known for its unsettling beauty than its somnolent qualities. Belladonna, or deadly nightshade. This plant, with its dark, alluring berries and delicate purple flowers, played a curious dual role in Renaissance Europe, acting as both a cosmetic and, far more ominously, a potent sleep-altering poison. Its presence in the realm of sleep aids underscores the perilous nature of self-medication in an era without regulated pharmacology. You might stumble upon belladonna in a secluded, shaded part of a garden, or notice a lady of the court applying a concoction to her eyes. The name belladonna literally means beautiful lady in Italian, a testament to its use by women to dilate their pupils, giving them a wide-eyed, alluring appearance that was considered fashionable. This is a mainstream historical fact. The cosmetic use of belladonna was well documented, adding a touch of dangerous glamour to the Renaissance aesthetic. Imagine the subtle yet striking effect of unnaturally large dark pupils in the candlelight, a look achieved at the cost of blurred vision and a racing heart. But beneath this veneer of beauty lay a powerful and potentially lethal secret. Belladonna, like mandrake, contains potent tropane alkaloids, primarily atropine and scopolamine. These compounds work by blocking the parasympathetic nervous system, leading to a host of effects including dilated pupils, dry mouth, increased heart rate, and critically for our discussion, central nervous system depression leading to sedation, or in higher doses, delirium, hallucinations, and fatal respiratory depression. Its use as a sleep aid was a desperate gamble, often employed in conjunction with other sedatives or in very minute, almost homeopathic quantities to induce drowsiness. Now, for a quirky tidbit, beyond its medicinal and cosmetic uses, belladonna was also a favorite ingredient in flying ointments, concocted by alleged witches. These ointments, often rubbed on the skin or mucous membranes, contain belladonna henbane and other hallucinogens. The sensations reported, like a feeling of lightness or disembodiment, were attributed to actual flight, when in reality they were merely the intoxicating effects of the plant compounds. So while you might not directly apply a flying ointment for sleep, the very substance that caused visions of soaring through the night sky could also, in a different dosage, plunge you into a death-like slumber. It's an interesting connection between perceived magic and very real pharmacological effects. Historians still argue whether the accidental poisoning deaths attributed to sudden sleep or unexplained stupor were often in fact the result of misguided attempts to self-medicate with potent substances like belladonna. Given the lack of precise dosages and understanding of toxicology, it's plausible that many who simply sought a night of rest inadvertently took their last eternal sleep. How many people simply drifted off and never woke up, their death attributed to natural causes or divine will, when a strong brew of belladonna was the true culprit? You might find belladonna prescribed by a physician, but only with extreme caution and in very small doses, perhaps as part of a complex sedative draft alongside less dangerous herbs. The danger was well known, and reputable physicians would likely have preferred safer, albeit less potent, alternatives. More likely it was found in the shadowy corners of the market, sold by those less concerned with patient safety and more with profit, or sought out by individuals too desperate to care about the risks. Imagine purchasing a tiny dried berry from a clandestine vendor, knowing full well that just a few too many could mean the end. The stakes for a good night's sleep were incredibly high. The physical effects of belladonna, even at sublethal doses, would be unsettling. You'd likely feel your mouth dry out, your heart race, and your vision blur, making the very act of reading or even navigating a dimly lit room a challenge. Then perhaps the heavy, unnatural drowsiness would descend. It wasn't a gentle lullaby, it was a chemical bludgeon, forcing your senses into submission. And if the dose was off, you could easily find yourself in a state of agitated delirium, plagued by terrifying hallucinations rather than restful dreams. The sleep it induced was often more akin to a chemically induced coma from which you might or might not awaken lucid. This dangerous dance with belladonna highlights a recurring theme in Renaissance sleep aids: the profound desperation that drove people to embrace remedies that were as likely to harm as to help. When the alternative was endless, agonizing nights of wakefulness, even the prospect of a hallucinatory stupor or accidental death seemed to some a bearable risk. You are witnessing a time when the search for rest was not just a comfort, but a terrifying fight for sanity against the insidious creep of exhaustion, even if the tools for that fight were as beautiful and deadly as the night itself. You've narrowly escaped the beautiful but deadly embrace of belladonna, perhaps now feeling a phantom dryness in your throat, a ghostly blur in your vision. But as evening deepens, another far more common and seemingly innocuous sleep aid emerges from the shadows of Renaissance life: alcohol. You might think of it as a social lubricant, a celebratory drink, but for many in this era, from the richest lord to the poorest peasant, it was a readily available, often desperate attempt to silence the clamor of a restless mind and induce slumber. Imagine the scene after a day of backbreaking labor, or perhaps endless political maneuvering. You slump onto a stool in a smoky tavern or recline in your opulent bedchamber. Your drink of choice might be a tankard of sturdy elixir or beer, the staple beverage for most due to unreliable water sources, or if your purse allows, a goblet of quinine. perhaps a robust red or a crisp white from a local vineyard. For the truly desperate or the elite stronger stuff like brandy or other distilled spirits was available though less common than wine or beer. A mainstream historical fact is that alcohol consumption was incredibly high across all social classes in Renaissance Europe, often serving as a primary source of hydration in an era of unsafe drinking water. It wasn't just for merriment, it was a fundamental part of daily life, including the winding down process. The logic was simple if flawed. Alcohol dulls the senses, relaxes the body, and makes you feel less anxious. It works right. For a little while, sure, you feel that initial warmth spreading through your limbs, a loosening of tension in your shoulders, a gentle cloudiness descending over your thoughts. The incessant worries of tomorrow, the unpaid debts, the looming plague, the neighbor's suspiciously healthy chickens begin to fade into a hazy, indistinct hum. Many people genuinely believed a strong drink before bed was the surest path to unconsciousness. You'd probably think, finally some peace and quiet in this head of mine. Now for a quirky tidbit. Beyond simple consumption, some Renaissance physicians and folk healers advocated for the use of alcohol in specific targeted ways for sleep. You might find recipes for soporific wines, where potent herbs like opium poppy or mandrake were steeped in strong wine, creating an even more potent and dangerous sedative. Imagine sipping a glass of wine that promises oblivion, unaware of the deadly botanical cocktail swirling within. It was a kind of proto-cocktail far more dangerous than your modern martini designed not for flavor, but for knockdown power. The thinking was that the alcohol acted as a solvent, extracting the active compounds from the herbs more effectively, and also delivering them more quickly to the bloodstream. Historians still argue whether the widespread reliance on alcohol for sleep masked a significant public health issue of chronic low-level alcoholism, or if it was merely a pragmatic, if imperfect solution to pervasive sleep deprivation in a pre-scientific age. Was the general lassitude and common digestive issues of the period sometimes misdiagnosed when they were in fact symptoms of chronic alcohol use? It's difficult to separate the cultural norm from the medical problem without more precise data. The problem as we know today is that while alcohol induces sleep, it doesn't improve sleep quality. In fact, it often fragments it. You might fall asleep quickly, but your sleep architecture, the crucial cycles of light deep and REM sleep would be severely disrupted. You'd likely experience more frequent awakenings, night sweats, and less restorative rest. The very solution you sought for peaceful sleep would in the long run perpetuate your exhaustion. You might wake up feeling groggy, dehydrated, and perhaps even more anxious than the night before, thinking, why am I still so tired? Perhaps I need more wine tonight. This vicious cycle would be a common trap for many. Furthermore, the moral and religious perspectives on drunkenness varied, but its commonality meant that using it for sleep was often seen as a practical necessity rather than a vice, particularly among the working classes. A man falling asleep drunk was less a moral failing and more a sign of a hard day's work and the harsh realities of life. It was simply how many managed to cope with the relentless physical and mental demands of their existence. You wouldn't be judged harshly for it, though perhaps gently ribbed in the morning for your loud snores. The very air in many homes and taverns would be thick with the smell of fermenting grains and grapes, a constant olfactory reminder of this pervasive sleep aid. You'd see children, too, given watered-down ale or wine to quiet their cries and encourage rest, a practice that, while dangerous, was seen as caring rather than neglectful. It was a pervasive, deeply ingrained habit, a liquid crutch in a world that offered few other comforts after a long, arduous day. You find yourself navigating a society where a good night's sleep was often purchased with a glass or several of bitter brew, a trade-off that ultimately provided little genuine rest. With the lingering warmth of alcohol in your belly offering a fleeting promise of ease, you begin to understand that Renaissance medicine, in its struggle against sleeplessness, wasn't always about comfort or gentle slumber. In fact, you'll encounter some truly dangerous and often ineffective medical malpractices, employed for insomnia remedies that today would send chills down your spine and likely land a physician in serious legal trouble. This era was a wild west of medical theory, where desperate measures were often considered the only option. Imagine visiting a learned physician, his study filled with dusty tomes and strange instruments. You recount your nights of restless tossing and turning, the exhaustion gnawing at your very soul. Instead of a gentle herbal infusion, he might propose a treatment that sounds more like a medieval torture method than a cure. One mainstream historical fact is the pervasive influence of humoral theory, which dominated medical thought for over a millennium from ancient Greece well into the Renaissance. This theory posited that the body was composed of four cardinal humors: blood phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and imbalances in these humors caused illness, including insomnia. Therefore, many treatments aim to rebalance these internal fluids, often through drastic means. One such method was purging, designed to rid the body of excess or corrupted humors. This could involve powerful emetics to induce vomiting or harsh laxatives to cause violent diarrhea. The idea was that if a humor, say an excess of black bile causing melancholy and wakefulness, was trapped in the body, expelling it would restore balance. Imagine yourself weak from lack of sleep, then subjected to violent bouts of vomiting or relentless trips to the privy, further depleting your energy and leaving you utterly miserable. You'd think, surely this can't be helping me sleep, and you'd be right. While the immediate exhaustion from such an ordeal might force a few hours of uneasy sleep, it certainly wasn't a restorative cure. The very act of undergoing such a procedure was an ordeal in itself, likely increasing stress rather than alleviating it. Now, for a quirky tidbit, beyond the physical purges, some physicians believed in purgative sounds, or even specific types of music to cleanse the mind and prepare it for sleep. This wasn't about soothing lullabies. It was about loud, repetitive, or even jarring sounds designed to drive out the bad humors or agitated spirits. Think of it as a form of ancient, slightly terrifying sound therapy, where the goal was to overwhelm the senses into submission. Historians still argue whether these auditory treatments were purely superstitious or if they had any psychosomatic effect on the patient, perhaps inducing a trance-like state through sheer sensory overload. It's a debate between magical thinking and the nascent understanding of the human mind's susceptibility to external stimuli. Another less invasive but equally dubious practice was the application of warm cooling compresses or substances to the head, particularly if the insomnia was attributed to an overheated brain. This might involve wrapping your head in cloths soaked in cold water vinegar, or even more bizarre concoctions meant to draw out heat. While a cool compress might feel momentarily soothing, it certainly wasn't addressing the root cause of chronic sleeplessness. You'd lie there shivering slightly with a damp, possibly pungent rag strapped to your forehead, wondering if this was truly the path to peaceful dreams. Historians still argue whether the apparent lack of success of these more extreme treatments was a deliberate oversight by physicians, or if it genuinely reflected the limited understanding of the complex mechanisms of sleep. Were they simply doing the best they could with the knowledge available? Or were some of these practices maintained due to tradition and the perceived authority of the healer, regardless of outcome? It's a chicken or egg question. Did the theories shape the practices, or did the practices reinforce the theories? You might also encounter ulcer irritants, applied to the skin, such as blisters, or get counter irritants, often to the back of the neck or scalp. These were meant to draw disease-causing humors to the surface and away from the internal organs or the brain. Imagine having a caustic paste applied to your skin, creating a painful weeping sore, all in the name of a good night's sleep. The discomfort would be immense, making the very idea of rest seem utterly laughable. This wasn't just about pain. It was about forcing the body to react to work on something else, supposedly distracting it from its sleepless state. Ultimately, these dangerous and often ineffective medical malpractices highlight the profound desperation of both patient and physician in the face of a poorly understood ailment. When sleep refused to come and the mind refused to quiet, no remedy, however uncomfortable or risky, was truly off the table. You are witnessing a time when medicine was still very much an art, a series of educated guesses and traditional beliefs, often at the patient's expense. The modern comfort of a simple sleeping pill seems a distant, almost miraculous luxury compared to the purges and blisters of the Renaissance. As the memory of purges and blisters still lingers, making you wince, you might be surprised to learn that another radical, yet alarmingly common medical practice was brought to bear on the problem of sleeplessness: bloodletting. You might associate this with ancient barber surgeons and primitive medicine, and you'd be right. But in Renaissance Europe, for a surprising array of ailments, including chronic insomnia, the solution often involved opening a vein. Imagine a physician with a serious, almost priestly demeanor examining your pale face and bloodshot eyes. After a careful assessment, he declares that your humors are out of balance, that an excess of blood or perhaps an agitated blood is causing your sleeplessness. His remedy to drain some of it away. A mainstream historical fact is that bloodletting performed by physicians, surgeons, or even barbers was a ubiquitous medical treatment throughout the Renaissance inherited from ancient Greek and Roman medical traditions. It was believed to cure everything from fevers and inflammation to, yes, even anxiety and insomnia by restoring humoral balance. The process itself was simple but unsettling. You might be seated or even lying down as the physician selects a vein, often in the arm, but sometimes in the neck leg or even under the tongue. He would then make a small incision with a sharp lancet or apply leeches to the skin. The blood would then flow into a basin, often a barber's striped pole, a visual cue for this very practice representing the blood-soaked bandages. You'd watch, perhaps feeling a strange mix of faintness and morbid fascination as your own vital fluid ebbed away. The amount of blood removed varied, but it could be substantial, leading to weakness and dizziness. Now, for a quirky tidbit, beyond merely draining blood, some practitioners believed that the site of the bloodletting was crucial. If your insomnia was linked to an overheated brain, they might bleed you from a vein closer to the head or even from the temples. If it was associated with issues lower in the body, they might bleed from the legs. This specificity, while based on flawed anatomical understanding, shows the meticulous, if misguided, thought process behind their methods. Imagine having a conversation with your doctor about which specific vein to tap to best alleviate your nighttime restlessness. It speaks to a profound, if misplaced, belief in the body's hydraulic system. Historians still argue whether the temporary relief experienced after bloodletting was due to a genuine physiological effect, such as a drop in blood pressure leading to drowsiness, or simply a powerful warm placebo effect, combined with the sheer exhaustion induced by the procedure itself. Was the post-bleeding lethargy misinterpreted as therapeutic sleep, or did the shock to the system somehow reset the body? It's a challenging question, given that patients often reported feeling better even if their underlying condition wasn't truly cured. You might find yourself feeling incredibly weak and lightheaded after a bloodletting session. The exhaustion from the procedure itself might force you into a heavy, if not truly restorative sleep. Your body, deprived of some of its vital fluid, would be in a state of shock, likely leading to a profound sense of fatigue. For someone suffering from chronic insomnia, even this induced stupor might be welcomed a temporary respite from the ceaseless torment of wakefulness. However, the long-term effects could be detrimental, leading to anemia, weakness, and overall debilitation, making it harder to function during the day, and ultimately not addressing the root cause of the sleeplessness. The rationale behind bloodletting for insomnia was rooted in the idea of plethora, an excess of blood thought to cause agitation and overheating. By removing this excess, the body would cool, calm, and prepare for sleep. It was seen as a way to drain off the agitated humors that kept the mind racing. You can imagine the physician gravely explaining that your sanguine humor is simply too abundant, keeping you too active and too awake. The practice wasn't just for the wealthy. While a skilled physician might charge a fee, barbers or even family members could perform rudimentary bloodletting, making it accessible to many social strata. You might see a small basin of blood proudly displayed outside a barber shop, a grim advertisement for his services. This widespread acceptance speaks to the profound medical consensus of the time, regardless of its true efficacy. The idea that removing blood could bring balance and thus sleep was simply a given. In hindsight, it's clear that bloodletting for insomnia was a testament to the dangers of applying an incorrect theoretical framework to a complex physiological problem. Instead of addressing nervous agitation or underlying causes of sleeplessness, it often exacerbated the patient's weakness, prolonging their suffering. You are witnessing a time when the cure was often more debilitating than the illness itself, highlighting the desperate and often misguided lengths people would go to for the elusive promise of a good night's rest. Having survived the unsettling experience of a Renaissance bloodletting feeling, perhaps a little faint but stubbornly still awake, you might start to question the purely physical remedies. What if the problem isn't just unbalanced humors, but something more ethereal, more magical? This leads you to a fascinating and deeply ingrained aspect of Renaissance sleep culture, the reliance on the amulets and charms. You'll discover the magical thinking and superstitious objects people use to ward off nightmares, and perhaps more importantly, to induce rest. Imagine your grandmother, her face lined with wisdom and worry, pressing a small, oddly shaped pouch into your hand. Or perhaps you see a merchant selling tiny carved figures and knotted cords in a bustling marketplace, promising protection and peaceful slumber. This wasn't fringe behavior. A mainstream historical fact is that throughout the Renaissance, alongside burgeoning scientific inquiry, belief in magic divination and the power of sympathetic magic remained incredibly widespread across all social strata. Amulets and charms designed to protect against evil spirits, illness, and bad dreams were a common sight. They were an active measure against the unseen forces thought to disrupt sleep. These amulets could take many forms. You might find a one-carved piece of wood, perhaps from a specific tree like elder believed to ward off evil, or a tea stone you chosen for its perceived astrological properties, or simply its unusual shape carefully placed under your pillow. Some people wore rings, engraved with protective symbols, or even short prayers. The material itself wasn't always the point. It was the intention and the belief imbued within the object that was thought to give it power. You'd carefully place your chosen charm near your bed, a silent plea for the night's horrors to pass you by, or for slumber to finally descend. Now, for a quirky tidbit, one particularly strange sleep-inducing charm involved using parts of animals. There are accounts of people sleeping with a hard, dried bat's heart, or the higher foot of a mole, under their pillow, believing these objects would draw out restlessness or invite heavy sleep. The logic, if you can call it that, was often based on sympathetic magic bats or nocturnal moles live in the dark and sleep deeply. Therefore, their parts must imbue similar qualities. Imagine reaching under your pillow, not for a smartphone, but for a desiccated animal organ, hoping it would work its peculiar magic. It sounds less like a lullaby and more like the premise for a horror movie, but for many it was a genuine article of faith. Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of these amulets and charms was purely a placebo effect, or if the deep psychological comfort they provided truly altered a person's state of mind, reducing anxiety and making sleep more attainable. Was the belief in their power so strong that it genuinely calmed the nervous system, or was it simply a coping mechanism that offered a sense of control in an uncontrollable world? It's a fascinating interplay between faith psychology and the unconscious mind. You might also encounter sleep spells or specific prayers whispered over a charm before bed. These were not necessarily malevolent incantations, but rather ritualistic verses often drawing on Christian imagery mixed with older folk traditions intended to invoke protection and peace. The words themselves, recited with fervent hope, were as much a part of the charm as the object itself. You'd repeat the words, feeling their rhythm, letting them wash over you, hoping they would conjure the elusive embrace of slumber. The use of specific herbs, not for ingestion, but for their perceived magical properties when carried or hung, also falls into this category. Sprigs of rosemary, for remembrance and warding off evil, or by lavender, for calm, might be placed near the bed or inside the pillow. These weren't necessarily potent sedatives in themselves, but their symbolic associations and pleasant aromas were believed to create an atmosphere conducive to rest. You'd breathe in the faint scent of dried herbs, a subtle comfort in the otherwise harsh bedroom environment. These charms weren't just about warding off bad dreams, they were about inviting good sleep. They represented a fundamental human desire for control over the uncontrollable, a belief that by manipulating symbolic objects, one could influence the chaotic forces of the night. You are seeing a desperate attempt to find peace in a world where physical remedies were often brutal and unpredictable. The small, often peculiar objects under a Renaissance pillow were not just superstitions. They were tangible manifestations of hope for a quiet mind and a peaceful night. With your bat's heart amulet perhaps tucked firmly beneath your mattress, you find yourself looking not just to the earth for remedies, but to the heavens. In Renaissance Europe, the cosmos wasn't just a distant spectacle. It was a living, breathing entity whose influence permeated every aspect of life, especially health and well-being. This brings us to astrology's sleepy influence. A profound belief in how planetary alignments and celestial charts dictated optimal times for sleep and crucially guided remedies for sleeplessness. Imagine consulting an astrologer, a figure often considered a respected scholar or even a physician, not a mere fortune teller. He would meticulously draw your natal chart, a complex map of the stars and planets at your moment of birth, and then overlay it with the current celestial configurations. A mainstream historical fact is that astrology was not considered a fringe science in the Renaissance, but a legitimate academic discipline taught in universities alongside medicine and philosophy. Physicians frequently consulted astrological charts to determine the best time to administer medicines, perform surgeries, and even predict the course of an illness, including, of course, the stubborn ailment of insomnia. The core belief was that each planet and zodiac sign exerted specific influences on the human body and mind, affecting the balance of the humors. For instance, Saturn, a cold, melancholic planet, was often associated with conditions like depression and chronic sleeplessness. If your natal chart showed a strong or ill-aspected Saturn, or if the current planetary transits were unfavorable, an astrologer might diagnose your insomnia as a cosmic affliction. You'd listen intently as he explained how the malign influence of a particular planet was disrupting your natural rhythms, keeping you awake. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some astrological texts suggested that if your insomnia was particularly persistent, it might be due to your sleeping during an inauspicious planetary hour. Each hour of the day and night was ruled by a different planet, and sleeping during, say, a Martian hour, associated with aggression and energy, might be thought to agitate you rather than lull you to rest. So an astrologer might not just prescribe a potion, but a strict bedtime and wake-up schedule tailored to the benevolent planetary influences. Imagine setting your bedtime not by your exhaustion, but by the position of Jupiter in the night sky. I simply can't go to bed yet, darling. It's still the hour of Mars, and I might just sprout an extra nose. Historians still argue whether the astronomical calculations involved in Renaissance astrology, despite their incorrect theoretical framework, contributed to early advancements in observational astronomy. While their interpretations were based on superstition, the meticulous charting of celestial movements required precise observation, which ironically laid some groundwork for later scientific breakthroughs. Did the pursuit of sleep through the stars accidentally further the study of the stars themselves? It's a cosmic paradox. When prescribing remedies, an astrologer-physician wouldn't just look at plants. They'd consider plants' minerals or even colors associated with beneficial planets. If your sleeplessness was due to a melancholic Saturnine influence, they might recommend herbs associated with the warm, jovial Jupiter like balm or saffron, or the soothing moon-like lettuce or poppy to counteract the cold, dry qualities of Saturn. You might be told to wear blue or green or sleep facing a specific direction, all dictated by the celestial map. Every element of your environment could be manipulated to align with the stars. The belief in the power of planetary influences also extended to the timing of remedies. If you were taking a sleep-inducing draft, the astrologer might advise you to consume it during the hour of the moon or Venus planets associated with tranquility and rest to maximize its effectiveness. Administering a powerful sedative under a bad planetary aspect might be considered not only ineffective, but potentially harmful. You wouldn't just take your medicine, you'd take it at the right time, according to the cosmic clock. This celestial approach offered a sense of order and explanation in a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable. When earthly remedies failed, the heavens provided a larger framework for understanding suffering, including the torment of sleepless nights. It shifted the blame from a personal failing to a cosmic alignment, offering a form of psychological comfort. You are seeing a profound human need for meaning, even in the face of relentless insomnia, projected onto the vast, indifferent expanse of the night sky. The stars, once seen as distant points of light, became a complex, interactive blueprint for your very slumber. With the moon's silent influence hopefully guiding you towards calmer waters, your focus now shifts from the celestial to the decidedly terrestrial, your dinner plate. In Renaissance Europe, what you ate and drank wasn't just about sustenance. It was intricately linked to your health, your humors, and perhaps surprisingly, the quality of your sleep. You'll investigate the often bizarre theories behind dietary dreams and nightmares, and the surprising role of certain foods in Renaissance sleep theories. Imagine sitting down to your evening meal. It might be a hearty stew, perhaps some roasted meat if you're well off, or simply bread and cheese if you're not. But as you eat, the prevailing medical wisdom, deeply rooted in humoral theory, would dictate that certain foods had specific qualities, hot or cold, wet or dry, that directly impacted your internal balance. A mainstream historical fact is that Renaissance dietary advice was meticulous, with physicians prescribing specific foods for specific temperaments and ailments, including recommendations for dinner to ensure a good night's rest. It wasn't just about nutrition, it was about internal harmony. Foods considered hot or heavy might be thought to agitate the humors, leading to wakefulness or restless sleep. For instance, rich fatty meats or heavily spiced dishes were often advised against for the evening meal, as they were believed to be difficult to digest and to generate hot vapors that would rise to the brain, disrupting sleep. You'd probably eye that succulent roasted boar with suspicion, wondering if it would condemn you to another night of tossing and turning. The irony, of course, is that a truly empty stomach could also keep you awake, leading to a delicate balance between too much and too little. Now, for a quirky tidbit, one particular food believed to induce sleep was lettuce. Not just any lettuce, but a specific variety often called lactica, thought to contain soporific properties due to its milky sap, which does contain a small amount of lacticarium, a mild sedative. You might be advised to eat a large bowl of plain lettuce before bed, perhaps with a drizzle of vinegar to balance its cold nature. Imagine the disappointment expecting a hearty meal only to be presented with a bowl of leafy greens, all in the name of peaceful slumber. More lettuce, didn't I just eat a salad for lunch? It sounds rather bland, but for the truly desperate, even a mound of leafy greens held the promise of rest. Historians still argue whether the dietary restrictions and recommendations for sleep had any genuine physiological basis, or if they were largely psychosomatic, driven by strong cultural beliefs about food in the body. While some modern understanding of diet and sleep certainly exists, e.g. avoiding heavy meals before bed, it's a debate whether the elaborate Renaissance dietary theories were mere superstition or a nascent, albeit flawed understanding of digestive impact on rest. Was the perceived heaviness of a meal truly sleep disrupting? Or was it the anxiety about its humoral effects that kept people awake? Beyond just inducing sleep, diet was also linked to the content of dreams. Foods were believed to influence the quality of your humors, which in turn shaped your nocturnal visions. Eating melancholic foods like lentils or cabbage might be thought to produce dark, troubling dreams. Conversely, sanguine foods like grapes or certain types of bread might encourage more pleasant, even prophetic dreams. You wouldn't just eat for your body, you'd eat for your subconscious, hoping to fill your nights with pleasant reveries rather than terrifying phantasms. Conversely, certain light foods were recommended for inducing sleep. Bland porridges, thin broths, or even simple fruit like apples were sometimes suggested for the evening meal. The idea was to put as little strain on the digestive system as possible, allowing the body to gently prepare for rest. You'd find yourself eating a rather uninspiring supper, hoping its very blandness would lull you into a serene oblivion. The preparation of these foods was also key. Overcooked or undercooked food, or food prepared with unsuitable ingredients, could all be blamed for digestive upset that then led to sleeplessness. So your Renaissance cook wasn't just a chef, they were an unwitting pharmacist, their culinary choices potentially dictating your night's rest. This intricate dance between diet and sleep highlights the all-encompassing nature of Renaissance medical philosophy. Every element of your daily life, from the stars above to the food on your plate, was considered part of a complex system that needed to be kept in balance for optimal health, including the most elusive of states, a good night's sleep. You are seeing a world where food wasn't just fuel, but a potent, often misunderstood medicine. Having navigated the surprisingly complex dietary landscape of Renaissance sleep, Your attention now turns to the foundational medical theory that underpinned almost every aspect of health and illness. Humoral theory's heavy head. This ancient concept dictated not only what you ate, but how physicians understood your body, your temperament, and crucially, why you struggled to sleep. It was a framework that dominated medicine for over 1,000 years, shaping every diagnosis and prescribed remedy. Imagine a physician peering at you, not just seeing a sleepless individual, but a complex interplay of internal fluids. A mainstream historical fact is that humoral theory, derived from Hippocrates and Galen, posited that the human body was composed of four primary humors: bloodworm, sanguine, hot and wet; phlegm, phlegmatic, cold and wet; yellow bile, choleric, hot and dry, and a black bile, melancholic, cold and dry. Each humor was associated with specific organs, temperaments, seasons, and yes, even sleep quality. Insomnia, therefore, wasn't a standalone condition, but a symptom of an imbalance in these fundamental bodily fluids. If you were a sanguine individual prone to cheerfulness and perhaps a bit too much activity, an excess of blood might be blamed for your wakefulness. The treatment, as we've explored, might involve bloodletting to reduce this plethora. If you were choleric, seeker prone to anger and restlessness, an excess of yellow bile might be boiling within you, requiring cooling or purgative remedies. You'd be told your fiery nature was quite literally keeping you up at night. Now, for a quirky tidbit, the very act of thinking particularly deep philosophical or scholarly thought was sometimes believed to generate an excess of dry heat in the brain, leading to a buildup of melancholic black bile. This in turn would cause chronic wakefulness and even madness. So if you were a diligent student or a profound thinker, your sleepless nights weren't a sign of overwork, but of your brain quite literally overheating with ideas. Imagine your doctor telling you to simply stop thinking so much to get some rest. Less Play-Doh, more porridge, my dear fellow. Your humors are boiling. It's an amusing, if slightly insulting, diagnosis. Historians still argue whether the persistence of humoral theory for so long was due to its explanatory power, however flawed, or simply the lack of compelling alternative theories that could offer a complete framework for understanding the human body. Was it a robust system that simply needed refinement, or a scientific cul-de-sac that hindered true medical progress for centuries? It's a debate about the evolution of scientific thought itself. For insomnia, the melancholic humor associated with black bile was often implicated. An excess of black bile was thought to be cold and dry, causing the brain to become dried out and agitated, leading to melancholy, anxiety, and an inability to achieve restful sleep. The remedies, therefore, were designed to introduce warmth and moisture. This might involve warming baths, gentle massage, or even the consumption of warming foods and drinks. You might be prescribed a diet of moist, nourishing foods, avoiding anything dry or sharp. Conversely, if your insomnia was attributed to an overabundance of phlegm, which was cold and wet, the goal would be to dry out and warm up the body. This could lead to recommendations for dry warming foods and the avoidance of damp environments. The very environment of your bedroom might be assessed based on humoral principles. Was it too damp? Too cold? All these factors were considered part of the humoral balance. The theory also extended to sleep itself. Sleep was often seen as a process where the vital spirits withdrew from the outer parts of the body and sensory organs to the inner organs, particularly the brain, allowing for repair and rest. Insomnia was the failure of these spirits to withdraw properly, perhaps due to agitation from an unbalanced humor. It was a complex, self-contained system of understanding that left little room for external factors, or what we now understand as neurological processes. You'd find that almost every sleep aid, from the herbs we discussed to the rituals, was prescribed through the lens of humoral theory. Opium, for instance, might be considered a cooling agent that calmed agitated humors. Alcohol, while superficially warming, might be understood in terms of its ability to dampen the vital spirits. Every treatment was a direct attempt to reestablish that delicate, ever-shifting balance of humors within you. It was a pervasive, deeply embedded belief system dictating not just your diagnosis, but your entire path to supposed recovery. You are witnessing a time when medicine was a delicate, dangerous art of balancing unseen forces within the human form. With your humors hopefully striving for a balanced calm, your Renaissance physician might now prescribe a different kind of solace, one that speaks to the senses and aims for gentle relaxation rather than drastic intervention. Baths and balms for rest. You'll experience the calming rituals of medicinal baths and aromatic balms, a stark contrast to the harsher treatments we've discussed. Imagine the steam rising in a dimly lit room, perhaps scented with herbs. A mainstream historical fact is that therapeutic bathing was a common practice in Renaissance Europe, drawing on Roman traditions and refined in places like Italian city-states. While public bathhouses, often lively and social, were still common, private medicinal baths were prescribed specifically for health conditions, including sleeplessness. These weren't just about cleanliness. They were carefully concocted prescriptions aiming to soothe agitated nerves and prepare the body for slumber. Your physician might recommend a warm bath infused with a specific blend of herbs. Think of chamomile, known for its calming properties, or lavender, long associated with relaxation and sleep. Poppy heads, though less potent than raw opium or lettuce leaves, might also be added to the water, their subtle sedative qualities believed to leach into the bath. You'd sink into the warm water, feeling the day's tension begin to ebb away, the gentle warmth a welcome contrast to the often cold and uncomfortable sleeping environments. The aroma alone, a blend of earthy herbs and clean steam, would be a balm to your frayed senses. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some bath recipes for sleep weren't just about herbs. They included bizarre ingredients like fox lungs or goose grease, believed to transfer the animal's docile, sleepy nature to the bather through sympathetic magic. Imagine seeing your bath preparer stirring in something that looks suspiciously like organ meat into your soothing soak. You'd probably try not to think about it too much, focusing instead on the steam. Oh, is that lavender, right? Just lavender. Definitely. It's a testament to the blend of science and superstition that characterized the era's medical practices. Historians still argue whether the perceived benefits of these medicinal baths were purely psychosomatic, a result of the ritual and relaxation, or if the absorption of certain compounds through the skin had a genuine, albeit mild, physiological effect. While transdermal absorption of active compounds is possible, the concentrations achieved from herbal baths would likely be very low. Was it the warmth and quiet, or a subtle chemical interaction that truly brought solace? It's a debate about the true power of relaxation versus pharmacological action. After your bath, the physician might prescribe an aromatic balm or unguent to be massaged into your temples, wrists, or feet. These balms were often made from animal fats or oils, infused with the same calming herbs used in the baths. Think of a thick, fragrant salve gently rubbed into your skin. It sent a continuous, subtle reminder of the bath's soothing effects. The act of massage itself, however rudimentary, would help relax tense muscles and improve circulation, further preparing your body for rest. You'd feel the cool, slick texture on your skin, inhaling the comforting scent as you drifted closer to sleep. These balms weren't just about smell. They were believed to deliver the virtues of the herbs directly to the affected areas. If your head was agitated and sleepless, a balm on the temples would supposedly draw out the heat or calm the racing thoughts. If your feet were restless, a foot massage with a calming balm might ground you. The physical sensation combined with the aroma created a multi-sensory experience designed to induce a state of tranquility. The use of baths and balms highlights a softer, more holistic side of Renaissance medicine, a recognition that the body and mind were interconnected, and that gentle soothing could be as important as aggressive purging. These were moments of quiet luxury for the wealthy and perhaps a rare cherished indulgence for the less fortunate who might rely on simpler herbal infusions for their baths. You are experiencing a brief moment of comfort and sensory pleasure in an era often defined by discomfort, a testament to the enduring human need for gentle remedies when faced with the relentless tyranny of sleeplessness. Emerging from your fragrant, soothing bath, perhaps feeling a flicker of actual calm, you realize that Renaissance Europe didn't just rely on potions or painful interventions for sleep. There was also a subtle, often overlooked attempt to manipulate the environment itself to invite slumber through harsh sensory soothers. You'll discover the use of specific sounds, music, and scents designed to lull you to sleep, an early intuitive form of what we now call environmental psychology, or even ASMR. Imagine your bedchamber not just a place to lie down, but a carefully curated space, or at least one that someone tried to curate. A mainstream historical fact is that while noise levels in Renaissance cities were generally higher than today, efforts were made to introduce calming sounds and scents, particularly among the affluent. This was a recognition that the senses played a crucial role in promoting or hindering rest. It wasn't about silencing the entire world, but about adding specific elements that would counteract the pervasive clamor. Music was a primary tool. You might hear the gentle strumming of a lute from an adjacent room, or the soft melody of a recorder. Lullabies, of course, have existed for millennia, but in the Renaissance, specific musical compositions, or even the quiet contemplative singing of psalms, were sometimes recommended for those struggling with insomnia. The idea was that harmonious sounds could literally retune the agitated humors of the mind, settling the vital spirits into a rhythm conducive to sleep. You'd lie there listening to the soft, repetitive strains, hoping the music would weave a spell of slumber. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some sources suggest that the sound of flowing water was considered particularly soporific. This wasn't just about a babbling brook. Wealthy individuals might have indoor fountains or water features designed precisely to create a gentle, continuous murmur. Imagine trying to sleep with the sound of a small, decorative waterfall trickling away beside your bed. For those without such luxuries, even the thought of rain or the distant sound of a river might have been mentally conjured as a means of seeking auditory comfort. It's an interesting precursor to modern white noise machines, just with a much more natural soundscape. Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of these sensory approaches was primarily psychological, a result of the person's belief and expectation of calm, or if the actual auditory and olfactory stimuli had a measurable physiological impact on the nervous system. Did the gentle scent of a sachet or the steady hum of a lute genuinely lower heart rate and brain activity? Or was it the perceived intention of calm that truly brought rest? It's a debate about the power of the mind over the body and the subtle ways our environment shapes our internal state. Beyond music and water, scents played a significant role. Your room might be scented with specific aromatic herbs or resins known for their calming properties. Lavender, often hung in sachets near the bed or tucked into pillows, was a perennial favorite, its soothing fragrance believed to quiet the mind. Rosemary, though sometimes seen as invigorating, also had calming applications, while myrrh or frankincense, often burned as incense, were thought to purify the air and promote a spiritual tranquility conducive to sleep. You'd inhale the subtle earthy or floral notes, allowing them to gently permeate your senses, a stark contrast to the less pleasant smells of the outside world. Sometimes the sensory intervention was even more direct. A servant might gently stroke your forehead or temples or apply a light calming pressure to your pulse points. This tactile soothing, combined with quiet whispers or simple repetitive movements, was an attempt to physically guide the body towards relaxation. You'd feel the light touch a subtle comfort in the darkness, a gentle reminder that even in sleeplessness, there was an attempt to bring you peace. These sensory soothers highlight a sophisticated, if unscientific, understanding of the interconnectedness of the senses and the mind. While they lack the empirical data we have today, Renaissance practitioners intuitively grasped that creating a calming sensory environment could significantly aid in the elusive quest for sleep. You are experiencing an era where the subtle arts of scent and sound were as much a part of the sleep regimen as any potent potion, a testament to humanity's ancient quest to trick the body into rest. Even with the gentle lull of a lute and the calming scent of lavender in the air, your Renaissance slumber remains elusive. Now you'll turn your attention to the very vessel of your attempted rest, the bedroom bizarrely designed. You'll explore the surprisingly utilitarian and often uncomfortable sleeping arrangements of the era, a far cry from the plush, personalized havens we often seek today. Imagine stepping into a typical Renaissance home after dark. If you're wealthy, your bedchamber might be adorned with tapestries, a four-poster bed, and perhaps even a fireplace. But if you're a commoner, which was the vast majority of the population, your sleeping space was a far less private or comfortable affair. A mainstream historical fact is that privacy, especially in the sense of a dedicated secluded bedroom for each individual or couple, was a luxury largely unknown to most people in the Renaissance. Sleeping arrangements were often communal, dictated by necessity, space constraints, and warmth. Your bedroom might be the main hall of a modest house shared with family members, servants, and possibly even livestock during colder months. Beds were often simple or straw pallets, sometimes laid directly on the floor. These were cheap and replaceable, but prone to pests and quick to become lumpy and uncomfortable. You'd feel the prickle of straw through your thin mattress, perhaps hearing the rustle of mice or the soft breathing of your snoring neighbor a few feet away. This communal sleeping environment meant constant noise drafts and a complete lack of personal space, making deep, uninterrupted sleep a significant challenge. Now for a quirky tidbit: in grander homes, even the seemingly private four-poster beds were often more about display than seclusion. They might have heavy curtains, but these were primarily for warmth and status, not necessarily soundproofing or true privacy. In fact, it was common for servants or retainers to sleep in the same room as their lords and ladies, either on trundles under the main bed or on pallets by the door. Imagine trying to get a restful night's sleep with a footman snoring discreetly or not so discreetly at the foot of your bed. It adds a whole new meaning to room service. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of communal sleeping arrangements reflected a different cultural understanding of personal space and privacy, or if it was simply a pragmatic response to economic and heating realities. Was the concept of individual solitude for sleep simply not as valued, or was it an unattainable luxury that people secretly yearned for? It's a debate about cultural norms versus practical constraints. The design of the beds themselves was also a contributing factor to poor sleep. Even for the wealthy, mattresses were often stuffed with feathers, wool, or straw, which could become compacted and lumpy over time. There were no ergonomic designs, no memory foam, no adjustable firmness settings. You'd constantly shift trying to find a comfortable position, only to discover a new lump or hollow. The bed frames were often made of wood, and while sturdy, could creak and groan, with every movement further disrupting any fragile attempt at rest. Furthermore, the lack of modern heating meant that bedrooms could be bitterly cold in winter. People often slept in layers of clothing, sometimes even with caps to retain body heat. The weight of heavy wool blankets could be oppressive, and the constant chill could make it difficult to truly relax. Conversely, in summer, the lack of ventilation could lead to stifling, humid conditions, making sleep just as elusive. You'd be either shivering or sweating, never quite at that ideal temperature for comfortable rest. The presence of pests was also an undeniable feature of Renaissance sleeping environments. Fleas, bedbugs, and lice were common companions, regardless of social status. Imagine the incessant itching and crawling sensations disrupting any chance of restful sleep. You'd spend part of your night scratching, swatting, and trying to ignore the unseen occupants of your mattress. It's a sobering reminder that even the most opulent settings couldn't escape the realities of the era. So while you sought comfort and peace, your actual bedroom environment was often a battlefield against discomfort, noise, and unwelcome company. It was a space designed primarily for warmth, basic shelter, and practicality, with the luxury of deep, uninterrupted sleep often an accidental byproduct rather than a deliberate outcome. You are seeing how the very architecture of daily life could be a major antagonist in the nightly quest for rest. Even within the bizarre confines of your Renaissance bedroom, your head still needs a place to rest, and that brings us to the surprisingly complex world of ornamental pillows and their peculiarities. Forget your memory foam or even a simple goose-down cushion. In this era, pillows were often strange concoctions imbued with peculiar beliefs, all in the desperate hope of coaxing you into slumber. Imagine trying to get comfortable on a pillow that feels less like a cloud and more like a bag of twigs. A mainstream historical fact is that while pillows existed across social classes, their stuffing and construction varied wildly, and they were often far less comfortable than modern equivalents. For the common folk, a pillow might simply be a sack stuffed with straw chaff or dried leaves. These were cheap, readily available, and easily replaced when infested, but they offered little support and could become lumpy and rustling throughout the night. You'd adjust it, punch it, Try to mold it only for it to resist, stubbornly retaining its uncomfortable shape. The constant rustle of straw against your ear would be a persistent auditory antagonist to your quest for quiet. For the wealthier pillows might be filled with her feathers or down, offering a softer experience, but even these would compact over time, losing their loft and becoming flat. They were also prone to harboring mites and other tiny creatures, which while unseen would certainly contribute to restless nights. There was no concept of hypoallergenic materials, no washing machines to refresh them. These pillows were often used for years, accumulating dirt and dust and serving as miniature ecosystems. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some Renaissance beliefs held that certain pillow stuffings could actively promote sleep or prevent nightmares. There are accounts of people filling their pillows with dried herbs, specifically for their soporific properties. Think lavender chamomile or hops, all recognized for their calming scents. But then you encounter the truly odd. Some believe that stuffing a pillow with feathers from specific birds, like a nightingale or a pigeon, could either enhance sleep or ward off evil spirits. Imagine a pillow filled with the feathers of a bird renowned for its nocturnal song, or perhaps for its perceived docile nature. You might sniff the pillow, hoping to catch a whiff of calming herbs, while subconsciously wondering if there was a pigeon feather nestled right next to your ear. Historians still argue whether the practice of stuffing pillows with specific herbs or animal products had any genuine, albeit mild, pharmacological effect through inhalation of volatile oils, or if it was almost entirely a psychosomatic ritual. Did the scent of lavender genuinely calm the nervous system, or was it the powerful belief that it would calm you that ultimately induced a more relaxed state? It's a debate about the subtle interplay between our senses, our expectations, and our physiology. Beyond the filling, the very construction of the pillow might have been an issue. Often these were simple sacks lacking the tailored shape and firmness that we associate with ergonomic support today. You might find yourself constantly adjusting your neck, trying to find a position that didn't lead to stiffness or pain in the morning. A comfortable posture was often a happy accident rather than a deliberate design outcome. Furthermore, the concept of a dedicated sleeping pillow might not always have been distinct. Pillows could be multi-purpose, used for propping up during the day or as part of seating arrangements, then pressed into service for nightly rest. This casual approach to something so essential for comfort underscores a general pragmatism in Renaissance households, where items served multiple functions. So as you lay your head down, you're not just resting on a cushion, but on a peculiar blend of practicality, superstition, and limited understanding of comfort. Your Renaissance pillow, whether lumpy straw or feather-filled, was a silent companion in your nocturnal struggle, a testament to the ingenious, if often misguided, lengths people would go to for the elusive promise of a peaceful night's rest. It might not have been soft, but it was certainly a conversation piece, even if only in the silent darkness of your mind. With your peculiar pillow offering limited solace, you might instinctively shift your body, seeking that perfect position where sleep finally descends. But in Renaissance Europe, even your shuck sleep positions held secret meanings, and were subject to superstitious interpretations believed to influence not just your rest, but your very fate. This wasn't merely about comfort, it was about cosmic alignment and protection. Imagine settling into your bed, trying to find a comfortable spot on your often lumpy mattress. A mainstream historical fact is that various sleep postures were associated with different health outcomes and even moral implications, drawing from ancient medical and philosophical texts. For instance, sleeping on your back was often advised against, as it was believed to make you more susceptible to nightmares, evil spirits, or even suffocation. The open mouth, the exposed chest, these were considered vulnerable points. You'd instinctively try to avoid lying flat on your back, turning instead to your side, even if it meant less comfort. Conversely, sleeping on your right side was often recommended. This position was believed to be beneficial for digestion, allowing food to pass easily from the stomach. Good digestion, as we discussed, was crucial for humoral balance and, by extension, a good sleep. The belief was that if your digestive system was working optimally, your humors would settle, and your mind would be free from the agitation caused by internal turmoil. So you might consciously try to drift off on your right side, hoping to appease your internal workings. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some very specific and strange beliefs surrounded sleeping positions for warding off particular ailments or for specific desires. For example, there are accounts of people sleeping with their head pointing towards the east to invite good health and clear dreams, as the east was associated with the rising sun and new beginnings. Even more peculiar, some believe that sleeping on your stomach could lead to monstrous dreams or even cause you to transform into a beast. Imagine the psychological burden, not only trying to sleep, but consciously trying to avoid a position that might turn you into a mythical creature. It's a fascinating blend of medical theory, superstition, and wishful thinking. Historians still argue whether these prescriptive sleep positions had any genuine physiological benefit, or if their perceived effects were purely psychological, stemming from the power of belief and the societal reinforcement of these ideas. Did sleeping on one's right side genuinely aid digestion, or was it the belief that it would aid digestion that made people feel better? It's a debate about the subtle lines between somatic experience and cultural conditioning. The position of your body was also believed to influence your susceptibility to nightmares and incubus, succubus attacks. Sleeping on your back, as mentioned, was seen as particularly dangerous, making you an open target for demonic entities that would press down on your chest, causing sensations of suffocation and terror. You'd likely wake up gasping, genuinely believing you'd been visited by a malevolent spirit, reinforcing the belief that your sleep position was to blame. Furthermore, some Renaissance texts advised against sleeping in positions that constricted the body, such as curled up too tightly, as this was thought to impede the free flow of humors and vital spirits, leading to restless sleep or poor circulation. The ideal was a relatively open yet protected posture that allowed the body to relax without becoming vulnerable. You try to stretch out despite the limited space in your bed, aiming for that perfect balance of comfort and cosmic protection. The concept of sleep posture was deeply entwined with the broader understanding of the body as a delicate, interconnected system, constantly influenced by internal and external forces. Your position wasn't just a physical choice, it was a micro-ritual, a subtle negotiation with the forces of night. You are seeing a time when even the unconscious movements of your sleeping body were believed to hold profound implications for your well-being, turning the simple act of lying down into a complex tapestry of belief and caution. Despite your best efforts with strange pillows and carefully chosen sleep positions, the night persists, often bringing with it the unsettling realm of dreams. This leads you to the dawn of Udiyuan dream interpretation, a nascent field in the Renaissance that sought to decipher the cryptic messages of the subconscious and link them to psychological well-being. Dreams weren't just random neurological firings. They were profound, often unsettling communiques. Imagine waking from a vivid, perhaps disturbing dream in the pre-dawn hours. Instead of dismissing it as a fleeting illusion, you might immediately seek its meaning. A mainstream historical fact is that dream interpretation was a serious intellectual pursuit in the Renaissance, drawing heavily on ancient texts like Artemidorus's Onero Critica. The interpretation of dreams and integrated into medical, philosophical, and even theological thought. Dreams were believed to be windows into your physical health, your humoral balance, your spiritual state, and even glimpses of the future. You wouldn't just have a dream, you would analyze it. Physicians would pay close attention to patients' dreams as diagnostic tools. Disturbing dreams, especially those involving fire, heat, or aggression, might be interpreted as signs of an excess of hot humors, like yellow bile causing internal agitation. Dreams of water, cold, or sluggishness could point to an excess of phlegm. The content of your dreams literally provided clues to your internal physical state, guiding the physician's diagnosis and prescription. You'd recount your nocturnal visions in detail, hoping the doctor could decipher the hidden meaning in your restless mind. Now, for a quirky tidbit, beyond medical diagnostics, some Renaissance dream interpreters believed that specific types of dreams could warn you of impending doom or even reveal hidden treasures. There are accounts of people attempting to induce prophetic dreams by performing rituals before bed, such as sleeping in a holy place or under a specific constellation. Imagine trying to force a dream about winning the lottery, or more realistically for the time, finding a lost cow. by sleeping with a silver coin under your tongue. It was a tantalizing blend of practical application and superstitious wish fulfillment. Historians still argue whether the widespread belief in predictive or diagnostic dreams served as a form of early psychological therapy, allowing individuals to articulate and process anxieties, or if it merely reinforced superstitious thinking and led to misguided medical treatments. Did the act of interpreting dreams, even if the interpretations were flawed, provide a beneficial outlet for subconscious concerns, or did it simply add another layer of unnecessary worry and complexity to people's lives? It's a debate about the unintended consequences of pervasive belief systems. The distinction between good and bad dreams was crucial. Pleasant dreams, particularly those of flying, serene landscapes or joyful encounters, were often seen as indicators of good health and humoral balance. They were a sign that your vital spirits were at peace. Nightmares, however, were universally feared. They were attributed to malevolent spirits, an imbalance of humors, or even indigestion from a heavy meal. The terror of an incubus pressing on your chest or a succubus luring you was a very real fear, causing genuine distress and further robbing you of restorative sleep. Dream interpretation wasn't just for scholars or physicians. It permeated popular culture. Dream books, often cheaply printed and widely circulated, offered simplistic interpretations for common dream motifs, making them accessible to the average person. You might consult one of these pamphlets after a strange night, desperately searching for meaning in the chaotic images that flickered through your mind. Was seeing a cat a sign of deceit, or a flock of birds a symbol of freedom? The answers offered might be vague, but they provided a framework for understanding. This intense focus on dreams highlights the Renaissance mind's engagement with the unseen world, its attempt to find order and meaning in the seemingly chaotic landscape of the subconscious. Dreams were not dismissed. They were actively engaged with, studied, and believed to hold profound truths about your past, present, and future. You are seeing a time when the very act of sleeping became a journey into a realm ripe with messages, turning your nights into a constant, often unsettling quest for understanding. As the echoes of your bedside prayers fade into the pre-dawn quiet, you might consider another facet of Renaissance life, where sleep was not just desired, but rigorously controlled within the hallowed, disciplined walls of monasteries and convents. Here you'll explore the monastic disciplines of sleep, discovering that rest was often scheduled, interrupted, and deeply intertwined with spiritual observance. Imagine the cold stone floor beneath your bare feet as the bell tolls, dragging you from a shallow slumber long before dawn. A mainstream historical fact is that monastic life in the Renaissance adhered to strict daily schedules, often referred to as the divine office or canonical hours, which involved regular periods of prayer and worship throughout the day and night. This meant sleep was inherently fragmented and disciplined, a tool for spiritual devotion rather than simply physical rest. Monks and nuns were expected to wake for matins and lauds in the middle of the night, regardless of their personal inclination. You'd find yourself rising in the absolute darkness, the world outside still silent, your body craving more rest, but your spirit compelled to prayer. Their beds themselves were usually Spartan hard pallets, thin mattresses filled with straw or simple wool, and perhaps a single rough wool blanket. The emphasis was on asceticism, not comfort. Soft beds were seen as an indulgence that could lead to spiritual laxity. You wouldn't find a plump feather pillow here. Instead, you'd likely have a block of wood or a very thinly stuffed cushion designed to provide minimal support and perhaps remind you of earthly discomforts. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some monastic orders even practiced sleep deprivation as a spiritual exercise, believing that prolonged wakefulness could lead to heightened spiritual awareness or visions. While this wasn't a universal rule, certain ascetics or mystics would intentionally limit their sleep, sometimes to only a few hours a night, as a form of self-mortification or to remain perpetually vigilant in prayer. Imagine consciously choosing less sleep to achieve a closer connection with the divine, pushing your body to its absolute limits of wakefulness. It's a stark contrast to our modern pursuit of maximal rest. Historians still argue whether the prescribed sleep schedules and often difficult sleeping conditions within monasteries genuinely fostered spiritual growth and discipline, or if they often led to chronic exhaustion, hallucinations due to sleep deprivation, and a decline in overall health. Did the rigorous schedule strengthen the spirit at the cost of the body, or did it merely demonstrate a remarkable human capacity to adapt to and even valorize arduous conditions? It's a debate about the true nature of spiritual discipline versus its physiological consequences. The architecture of monastic dormitories also reflected this communal and disciplined approach to sleep. Beds were often arranged in rows, sometimes with small partitions, but rarely with full privacy. The sounds of snoring, restless turning, and the quiet murmurs of brethren waking for prayers would be constant nocturnal companions. There was no escaping the shared experience of the night, even in sleep. You'd become attuned to the collective rhythm of the dormitory, a silent testament to the shared hardships and spiritual pursuits. For those struggling with physical illness that disrupted their sleep, there might be some leniency, perhaps a softer bed in the infirmary or a mild herbal sedative. But generally, the expectation was to endure, to offer one's physical discomfort as a sacrifice. Insomnia, particularly if it was a persistent nagging problem, might even be interpreted as a spiritual trial, a test of faith rather than a purely medical condition. You'd be encouraged to pray more, to meditate on your sleeplessness, and to find spiritual meaning in your restless nights. The monastic focus on regular, albeit interrupted sleep cycles was also a practical one. The body needed some rest to function, even if that rest was fragmented. However, the type of sleep often broken into two or more segments, with periods of wakefulness for prayer mirrored common lay sleep patterns of the era, the first sleep and second sleep phenomenon. Monastics simply formalized and ritualized these natural human sleep cycles within a spiritual context. Ultimately, the monastic approach to sleep highlights a profound contrast to the individualistic pursuit of comfort found in secular society. Here, sleep was not just a biological necessity, but a spiritual tool, a part of a larger divine purpose. You are seeing a time when the very act of resting or struggling to rest was imbued with profound religious meaning, turning the quiet hours of the night into another arena for devotion and discipline. Leaving the austere, disciplined world of the monastery, you step back into the bustling, stratified society of Renaissance Europe. Here, the search for sleep takes on wildly different forms, depending on your station, leading us to a fascinating comparison. Courtly comforts versus common core. You'll contrast the luxurious, if still imperfect, sleep aids available to the elite with the harsh, undeniable realities faced by the vast majority of the populace. Imagine yourself first in the opulent bedchamber of a duke or a wealthy merchant. A mainstream historical fact is that the elite in Renaissance Europe enjoyed vastly superior sleeping conditions compared to the common folk. Their beds were often massive, intricately carved, four-poster structures draped with rich velvet or silk hangings. These hangings weren't just for show, they provided crucial insulation against drafts and a degree of privacy and soundproofing in typically drafty, bustling castles or palaces. You'd sink into a deep mattress filled with soft feathers, or down perhaps even several layers of them, a stark contrast to the common straw pallet. The sheets would be made of fine linen, laundered regularly and warmed before you retired. This was the pinnacle of Renaissance sleep luxury, an attempt to create a cocoon of comfort. Now, for a quirky tidbit, wealthy individuals sometimes employed dedicated bed warmers, or bed makers, whose sole job was to prepare the bed for their lord or lady. This might involve not just airing the sheets and fluffing the pillows, but placing heated pans or ceramic warmers under the covers to chase away the chill, especially in winter. Imagine a servant meticulously ensuring your bed was perfectly toasty, like a human-sized hot water bottle before you even stepped into the room. It certainly beats shivering under a single threadbare blanket, waiting for your own body heat to make a dent in the cold. Historians still argue whether the perception of good sleep among the elite was genuinely better due to their material comforts, or if their different anxieties, political intrigue, courtly duties, financial dealings simply replaced the physical discomforts of the common person, leading to equally troubled rest. Did silk sheets truly equate to deeper sleep, or just a more comfortable form of sleeplessness? It's a debate about whether comfort addresses the root cause of restless minds. Contrast this with the common core, the vast majority of people from farmers and laborers to urban artisans. Their sleeping arrangements were dictated by necessity and poverty. As you've seen, your bed would likely be a simple, straw mattress one laid on the floor, perhaps shared with several family members, even in the same room as the family's animals for warmth. Privacy was virtually non-existent. The bedding would be coarse wool or linen, rarely washed and often flea-ridden. The light sources also differed drastically. The elite had candles, often beeswax candles, which burned cleaner and brighter, or even oil lamps with multiple wicks. This allowed for reading or quiet activities before bed. For the common person, light was scarce and expensive. A single tallow candle or a flickering hearth was often all they had, meaning that darkness, true darkness, descended earlier and more completely, forcing a different rhythm of life and sleep. You'd extinguish the single flame and be plunged into absolute blackness, relying on the faint moonlight or the distant glow of a city if you were near one. Beyond the physical comfort, the elite also had access to the most skilled physicians and the rarest, most potent sleep aids from across the known world. Exotic spices, potent herbal concoctions, and as we've explored, readily available opium. The common person relied on local folk remedies, accessible herbs, and perhaps the cheapest, most readily available intoxicant alcohol. The quality, purity, and safety of their sleep aids varied wildly. The differences extended to the entire evening routine. For the wealthy, bedtime might involve elaborate rituals of dressing and undressing, perhaps a light supper, and gentle conversation, creating a gradual winding down. For the common laborer, it was often an abrupt transition from physically demanding work to immediate exhausted collapse. There was little leisure time for pre-sleep relaxation. You'd simply fall into bed hoping your sheer fatigue would be enough to bring oblivion. Ultimately, the gulf between courtly comforts and the common core highlights the profound social inequalities of the Renaissance. While both rich and poor shared the fundamental human need for sleep, their means of achieving it and the daily obstacles they faced were worlds apart. You are seeing how privilege, even in the realm of slumber, shaped the very experience of life and rest in this complex era. Leaving behind the stark contrasts of courtly comfort and common struggle, your journey into Renaissance sleep now brings you face to face with the figures who held the keys to health and healing, the physicians and their potions. You'll meet some prominent Renaissance physicians and their often dubious sleep-inducing concoctions, revealing a medical landscape far removed from modern pharmacology. Imagine stepping into the study of a renowned physician, perhaps someone like Paracelsus or Andreas Vesalius, figures whose names still echo through history. These weren't mere folk healers. They were learned men, often trained at prestigious universities, yet their understanding of the human body and disease was still profoundly shaped by ancient theories. A mainstream historical fact is that Renaissance physicians relied heavily on classical texts, particularly those of Galen, and their practice was a blend of empirical observation, philosophical speculation, and for us often startlingly ineffective or dangerous treatments. For insomnia, they didn't have a simple pill. They had a vast array of complex, often multi-ingredient potions. Their sleep-inducing concoctions were typically complex, incorporating many of the herbs we've already touched upon, but often in more elaborate formulations. You might be prescribed a your sleeping draft, a liquid potion painstakingly mixed with ingredients like opium, mandrake, henbane, and other powerful sedatives. But these weren't just single-ingredient solutions. They often included dozens of other components, spices, minerals, animal parts, or even precious stones believed to enhance the potion's efficacy through sympathetic magic or humoral properties. Imagine a brew that tasted like a bitter medicinal soup, thick with unidentifiable particulate promising oblivion. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some physicians, particularly those with alchemical inclinations, and many did believed in the power of anarum potabile, or drinkable gold, as a universal remedy capable of restoring balance and bringing about tranquil sleep. While clearly lacking any real pharmacological effect, the idea was that gold, being the most perfect and noble metal, could impart its perfection to the human body. Imagine being presented with a tiny vial of yellowish liquid, perhaps with actual gold flakes suspended within, told it was the ultimate cure for your restless nights. It would certainly lighten your purse, if not your mind. Historians still argue whether the elaborate multi-ingredient potions of the Renaissance were genuinely believed to be more effective due to their complexity, or if the sheer number of ingredients was a way for physicians to appear more learned and to justify higher fees. Was it a genuine attempt at comprehensive treatment or an obfuscation of limited true understanding? It's a debate about the motivations behind complex medical formulations in an era of nascent scientific inquiry. Beyond direct sedatives, physicians also prescribe purgatives, emetics, and bloodletting, as discussed, all under the umbrella of balancing the humors to induce sleep. The underlying principle was that by restoring equilibrium within the body, sleep would naturally follow. They weren't necessarily treating insomnia directly, but rather what they perceived as its underlying cause, which often involved violent interventions. You'd be subjected to a series of debilitating treatments, hoping that the ultimate outcome would be a night of peace. The communication between physician and patient was also crucial. A skilled physician might engage in lengthy conversations, not just about your symptoms, but about your daily habits, your temperament, and even your dreams. This holistic approach, while rooted in flawed medical theory, allowed for a personalized, if not always effective, treatment plan. You'd feel heard even if the proposed remedy involved leeches or a truly horrifying tasting potion. The prestige of the physician often played a significant role in the patient's belief in the treatment's efficacy. A well-regarded doctor from a respected medical school, perhaps someone like Ganiorni Gabriele Fallopio, known for his anatomical work, but also a practicing physician, would inspire more confidence than a local barber surgeon. This faith in turn could contribute to a powerful placebo effect where the patient's expectation of improvement genuinely led to perceived relief even from a dubious potion. Ultimately, the Renaissance physician and his potions represent a fascinating intersection of burgeoning anatomical knowledge, ancient medical dogma, and a profound, if sometimes misguided, desire to alleviate human suffering. Their efforts to cure insomnia were a microcosm of their broader medical practices, complex, often dangerous, and always deeply embedded in the prevailing scientific and philosophical thought of their time. You are seeing a medical landscape where a good night's sleep was a hard-won victory, often achieved through remedies that were as much acts of faith as they were of medicine. Having endured the complex and often harsh concoctions of the Renaissance physician, your mind still restless might now turn to an even more enigmatic figure, the alchemist. You'll discover how these mystical scientists pursued not only the elusive philosopher's stone for gold, but also elixirs for eternal rest, blurring the lines between chemistry magic and the desperate search for ultimate tranquility. Imagine stepping into a dimly lit laboratory filled with bubbling retorts, strange odors, and the glint of polished copper. An alchemist robed and intense is meticulously tending a furnace, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of scholarly curiosity and esoteric ambition. A mainstream historical fact is that alchemy in the Renaissance was not merely a fantastical pursuit of turning lead into gold. It was a complex discipline encompassing chemistry, metallurgy, medicine, philosophy, and mysticism. Many respected thinkers like Isaac Newton years later engaged in alchemical studies. For some, the ultimate transmutation wasn't just metallic, it was the perfection of the human body, including the achievement of perfect, enduring rest. Alchemists believed that by purifying and combining base elements, they could create a universal panacea, or one elixir of life, which would not only cure all diseases, but also grant longevity and profound peace. For the insomniac, this elusive elixir promised not just a night's sleep, but perhaps a state of sustained, blissful unconsciousness, a form of eternal rest that transcended mere human slumber. You'd listen mesmerized as the alchemist spoke of distilling the very essence of tranquility from raw matter, a promise far more alluring than any bitter herbal draft. Now, for a quirky tidbit, one particular alchemical quest that sometimes intersected with the desire for sleep was the search for philosophical mercury, or liquid gold. This wasn't just about wealth. It was believed to be a perfected substance capable of conferring spiritual and physical perfection. Some alchemists hypothesized that a properly prepared philosophical mercury could induce a profound, almost death-like sleep, a state of perfect stasis from which one would awaken utterly rejuvenated or perhaps not awaken at all, achieving a kind of peaceful transcendence. Imagine an alchemist offering you a drop of shimmering liquid, claiming it would lead to ultimate repose. It sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, yet it was a serious pursuit for many. Historians still argue whether the practical experiments conducted by alchemists, despite their mystical goals, laid crucial groundwork for the development of modern chemistry and pharmacology. Did their relentless pursuit of transformative elixirs, including those for sleep, inadvertently lead to discoveries about distillation extraction and the properties of various substances? Or was their work largely a dead end for true scientific progress? It's a debate about the winding and often unexpected path of scientific discovery. The alchemical process for creating these supposed elixirs often involved lengthy, complex procedures, heating distillation, sublimation, and calcination, all performed with specific astrological timings and ritualistic intent. The resulting compounds were often highly toxic, unknowingly containing heavy metals like mercury or lead, which would certainly induce unconsciousness, but likely in a fatal rather than restorative way. You might be offered a vial of something metallic tasting and shimmering perhaps, with the alchemist gravely warning you of its immense power both for life and for the final sleep. Alchemists often incorporated astrological principles into their work, believing that the celestial influences impacted the transformation of matter. The planetary alignment for creating a particular sleep elixir might be just as crucial as the precise temperature of the furnace. This fusion of cosmic and terrestrial elements highlighted the alchemist's holistic worldview, where everything in the universe was interconnected. For the insomniac, the alchemist offered a different kind of hope, not just a cure for sleeplessness, but a gateway to a higher state of being, a philosophical slumber. This pursuit was driven by a deep dissatisfaction with the limitations of conventional medicine and a yearning for a more profound solution to human suffering. You are witnessing a time when the boundaries of science and magic were wonderfully, terrifyingly blurred, and the ultimate rest was sought not just in herbs, but in the very transmutation of matter itself. Having explored the alchemist's mystical quest for enduring calm, your journey into Renaissance sleep now takes a darker, more somber turn. You'll encounter a devastating force that profoundly impacted sleep patterns and mental states across Europe: the plague's impact on sleep. Understanding how widespread disease exacerbated sleep disturbances and led to desperate measures casts a chilling light on the daily realities of the era. Imagine the pervasive dread, the constant whisper of the passion and Black Death, or subsequent plague outbreaks that hung like a pall over cities and countryside alike. A mainstream historical fact is that recurrent waves of plague, from the devastating mid-14th century Black Death to later epidemics, profoundly impacted Renaissance society, causing immense mortality and widespread psychological trauma. The fear of contagion, the sight of death, and the constant threat to life utterly shattered any semblance of peaceful rest. You'd lie awake straining to hear sounds from your neighbors' homes, dreading the morning when the carts might come for the deceased. The most immediate impact of plague on sleep was profound anxiety. The relentless fear of contracting the disease, watching loved ones succumb, and the grim procession of death outside your window would make sleep virtually impossible. The mind would race, consumed by dread, unable to find peace even in exhaustion. For those who did fall asleep, nightmares would be vivid and terrifying, filled with images of sickness, death, and the grotesque symptoms of the disease. You might wake in a cold sweat, convinced the fever had taken hold. Now, for a quirky tidbit, during outbreaks, some desperate individuals believed that certain powerful smells, even unpleasant ones, could ward off the plague, and by extension induce a sense of security conducive to sleep. This might involve carrying pungent herbs like rue or garlic, or even burning strong-smelling resins or pitch in the home. Imagine trying to sleep in a room thick with the acrid smoke of burning tar or the overwhelming aroma of garlic, hoping it would deter not just flea, but the very angel of death, a bizarre attempt to create a hygienic bubble that also served as a sort of anti-anxiety sensory overload. Historians still argue whether the increased incidence of mental health issues, including severe insomnia and delirium during plague outbreaks, was purely a psychological response to trauma, or if the disease itself had neurotoxic effects on survivors that contributed to long-term sleep disturbances. Was it simply the terror of the situation, or did the physical illness leave a lasting impact on the brain's ability to regulate sleep? It's a somber debate about the biological and psychological legacies of widespread disease. Beyond the mental torment, the physical symptoms of the plague itself. Fever, pain from buboes, swollen lymph nodes, delirium would make sleep physically impossible for those afflicted. Even if you survived the initial onslaught, the lingering weakness, the secondary infections, and the sheer exhaustion from fighting the disease would continue to disrupt rest for weeks or months. Sleep became a luxury, a painful reminder of what your body was no longer capable of. For those trying to help the sick, sleep also became a casualty. Physicians, healers, and family members nursing the ill would work ceaselessly, often going days with little to no rest, their own bodies pushed to the brink of collapse. The communal fear, the constant ringing of church bells for the dead, and the grim reality of life in a plague-stricken area created an environment utterly hostile to peace. The social fabric of the Renaissance also contributed to sleep disruption during plagues. Quarantine measures, even if loosely enforced, could mean isolation and anxiety. The breakdown of normal routines, the emptying of streets, and the suspension of commerce would create an eerie, unsettling silence punctuated by the sounds of suffering, which itself could be profoundly disturbing to the sleep cycle. You'd find your internal clock utterly out of sync, the boundaries between day and night blurred by the constant threat. In this grim landscape, desperate measures for sleep, no matter how extreme, would have been embraced with even greater urgency. Opium, mandrake, and strong wines would be consumed not just for comfort, but for sheer oblivion, a temporary escape from the waking nightmare. The line between medicinal use and a desperate longing for unconsciousness would blur completely. The plague's impact on sleep wasn't just about individual discomfort. It was about the collective trauma of a society constantly battling an unseen enemy. It highlighted the fundamental fragility of human life and the profound ways in which external catastrophes could utterly dismantle the most basic human need for rest. You are witnessing a period where sleep became a battleground, constantly assaulted by fear, pain, and the overwhelming presence of death. Leaving the haunting specter of plague-induced sleeplessness behind you, might now find yourself on the open road, navigating the unpredictable world of Renaissance travel. This brings us to the unique challenges of travelers' troubled tucks. Exploring how journeys across Europe created their own distinct set of sleep disruptions and desperate attempts at rest. Imagine embarking on a long journey, perhaps a pilgrimage to a holy site, a trading expedition, or a diplomatic mission. Roads were rough, bandits were a constant threat, and comfort was a distant dream. A mainstream historical fact is that long-distance travel in the Renaissance was arduous and time-consuming, often taking weeks or months, with accommodations varying wildly from private estates to overcrowded inns or even sleeping outdoors. Consistent quality sleep was often the first casualty of the road. You'd be jolted awake by the creaking of wagon wheels, the unfamiliar sounds of a new town, or the persistent worry of your safety. Nights on the road rarely offered true respite. If you were fortunate, you'd find an inn, but these were rarely quiet havens. They were often bustling, noisy places filled with other travelers, their horses, merchants, haggling, and perhaps late-night revelry. Beds were often shared, sometimes with strangers, and cleanliness was a gamble. You'd lie on a thin, lumpy mattress, listening to the cacophony around you, perhaps feeling the insistent itch of fleas. The air would be thick with the smell of stale ale, sweat, and wood smoke, making it difficult to breathe, let alone sleep deeply. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some travelers, particularly those on long, dangerous routes, carried small traveler's pillows, stuffed with specific herbs believed to ward off bandits or bring protective dreams. These weren't for comfort, but for perceived security. Imagine a seasoned merchant eyes scanning the horizon, meticulously packing a small, hardened bag of dried rosemary or mugwort, believing it would guard his sleep against nocturnal threats. It's a fascinating blend of pragmatism and superstition, a desperate attempt to create a psychological shield against the perils of the night. Historians still argue whether the physical and mental strain of constant travel in the Renaissance significantly contributed to chronic sleep deprivation across wider segments of society, impacting public health beyond just the immediate fatigue of a journey. Did the constant disruptions to sleep cycles make travelers more susceptible to illness, or was it simply a temporary inconvenience that people quickly recovered from once settled? It's a debate about the long-term health consequences of a fundamentally different way of life. If inns were unavailable or too expensive, you might find yourself sleeping outdoors, under the shelter of a tree or wrapped in a blanket beside your horse. The sounds of the wilderness rustling leaves, distant animal calls. The hoot of an owl would be your lullaby. While seemingly more peaceful than a noisy inn, sleeping in the open meant constant exposure to the elements, insects, and the very real danger of wild animals or human predators. You'd sleep with one eye or at least one ear open, your body tense, never fully relaxing into deep sleep. The change in routine was also a major disruptor. Your internal clock, accustomed to the rhythms of home, would be thrown into disarray by irregular meal times, varied bedtimes, and the constant physical demands of travel. The exhaustion might be overwhelming, but your body and mind on high alert in unfamiliar surroundings would resist true rest. You'd stumble through your days in a perpetual state of half-sleep, your thoughts hazy, your reactions slow. For wealthier travelers, there were some small comforts. They might carry more comfortable bedding or even have a dedicated servant whose job was to prepare their sleeping quarters no matter how humble. They could also afford more potent sleep aids like opium or strong wines to force their bodies into unconsciousness, even if it meant waking up groggy and disoriented. But even wealth couldn't entirely shield you from the fundamental discomforts and dangers of the road. Ultimately, travel in Renaissance Europe was a profound antagonist to restful sleep. It stripped away the familiar comforts and routines of home, replacing them with uncertainty, discomfort, and danger. You are witnessing a time when simply getting from one place to another was a physical and mental ordeal, where the promise of a good night's sleep was a rare and precious commodity, often sacrificed on the altar of progress and necessity. After the jarring realities of travel, your focus now shifts to the smallest, most vulnerable members of Renaissance households, the children. This brings us to children's sleep parents' plight. Examining the unique sleep struggles of infants and children and the often desperate, sometimes dangerous remedies parents employed to bring quiet to their restless young ones. Imagine a Renaissance mother, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, rocking a wailing infant in the dim light of a hearth. A mainstream historical fact is that infant and child mortality rates were tragically high in Renaissance Europe, and children's sleep was often sporadic and frequently disturbed both by illness and the general commotion of a crowded household. There was no concept of a crib hour or a separate nursery. Children typically slept with their parents or other family members, often sharing a bed for warmth and comfort. You'd hear the constant whimpers, the sudden cries, and feel the restless squirming of a child beside you, making your own sleep an interrupted affair. Infants particularly were a source of profound sleep deprivation for their parents. Colic, teething, and common childhood illnesses would lead to endless nights of comforting rocking and soothing. Parents pushed to the brink of exhaustion would resort to almost anything to quiet their child and secure even a few hours of desperately needed rest for themselves. This desperation often led to remedies that we would find shocking today. Now, for a quirky tidbit, one disturbingly common practice was the administration of quieting syrups, or sleeping drafts, to infants and young children. These concoctions often contained opium, either directly or as a poppy head infusion or other potent sedatives like mandrake or belladonna, albeit in highly diluted forms. The intent was to induce a profound, often drug-induced sleep. Imagine a parent giving their crying baby a spoonful of a bitter-tasting syrup, hoping for silence, unaware of the fine line between sedation and accidental overdose. It was a terrifying gamble driven by sheer desperation and the profound lack of safe alternatives. Historians still argue whether the high rates of unexplained infant deaths in the Renaissance might have been in some cases exacerbated by the well-intentioned but dangerous use of powerful sedatives. While infant mortality was high due to disease and poor sanitation, it's a sobering question whether the desire for quiet led to accidental tragedies that went unrecorded as such. Was the sleep induced truly peaceful or dangerously deep? Beyond these potent concoctions, more benign, though still sometimes ineffective methods were employed. Lullabies, of course, were universal, sung softly to soothe and comfort. Swaddling was common, wrapping infants tightly to mimic the womb and prevent startling movements. Rocking cradles, sometimes suspended or designed to be gently swung, were also used to create a soothing motion. You'd spend hours gently swaying a cradle, your own eyelids growing heavy with the repetitive motion, hoping your child would finally succumb. Diet also played a role. As we discussed, some parents might give infants watered-down ale or wine, believing its mild, intoxicating effect would lead to slumber. Breastfeeding was often considered a natural sleep aid, as the warmth and comfort of the mother's body combined with the milk could lull a baby to sleep. However, if the mother's own diet was poor, it could affect the quality of her milk and, by extension, the child's restless sleep. For older children, bedtime stories, often moralistic tales or folk legends, might be told to quiet active minds. The routine itself, however rudimentary, would be an attempt to establish a rhythm for sleep. However, the chaotic nature of Renaissance life, shared living spaces, early work demands for children, and frequent illness often made consistent sleep patterns elusive. The challenges of children's sleep highlight the immense pressures on Renaissance parents. In a world without modern medical knowledge, safe childcare practices, or even adequate personal space, providing a good night's sleep for a child was a constant uphill battle. You are witnessing the profound love and desperate measures of parents, striving to bring a moment of peace both to their weary children and to their own exhausted lives. Having witnessed the quiet struggles of Renaissance parents to soothe their children, you now turn to another demographic, often disproportionately affected by sleep issues: women. This brings us to women's waking woes. Delving into the specific challenges women faced regarding sleep, often linked to their societal roles, health concerns, and the unique pressures of the era. Imagine a Renaissance woman, whether a lady of the court, a bustling merchant's wife, or a hardworking peasant. Her day is typically a relentless cycle of duties, far more physically and emotionally demanding than one might initially perceive. A mainstream historical fact is that Renaissance women across all social strata bore the primary responsibility for household management, childcare, and often significant labor in fields or workshops. This constant physical exertion, coupled with endless anxieties, was a profound antagonist to restful sleep. You'd find yourself perpetually tired, your mind churning with to-do lists that stretched from dawn till the next dawn. The pressures of childbirth and infant care were paramount. As we've just discussed, endless nights spent nursing, rocking, and comforting restless infants would lead to chronic sleep deprivation for mothers. The fear of infant mortality, a constant specter in every home, would also contribute to an anxious wakefulness. For those who survived childbirth, the lingering physical discomforts and the demands of a new baby meant that truly restorative sleep was a rare luxury for many years. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some Renaissance folk beliefs suggested that women's dreams were more prone to being influenced by their menstrual cycles or by the phases of the moon, leading to more vivid or disturbing nocturnal visions that disrupted sleep. This was often tied to the humoral theory, where bodily fluids were thought to be particularly volatile in women. Imagine a woman consulting an elderly village elder who might advise her to use certain herbs or wear specific amulets during her cycle to ward off troubled dreams. It's a blend of physiological observation, however misattributed, and pervasive superstition. Historians still argue whether the medical understanding of female bodies in the Renaissance, often rooted in classical texts that viewed women as fundamentally colder and wetter than men, led to less effective or even harmful treatments for their sleep disorders. Were women's sleep complaints dismissed or misdiagnosed due to a flawed understanding of their distinct physiological and psychological needs? It's a debate about how historical medical biases impacted real-world patient care. Beyond childcare, women often faced unique anxieties that kept them awake. For noble women, the pressures of marriage alliances producing male heirs, managing large households, and navigating complex courtly intrigues could lead to immense stress. For common women, the struggle for daily survival, the fear of famine, illness, or male violence, and the relentless physical labor of farming or spinning wool would be constant worries. These anxieties, often suppressed during the day, would inevitably surface during the quiet, dark hours of the night. You'd lie awake, your mind a whirlwind of worries about your family's survival, your dowry, or simply having enough food for tomorrow. The lack of personal space and privacy, as discussed, also impacted women disproportionately. In crowded homes, finding a quiet corner for rest was impossible. Women, often the last to sleep and the first to rise, would be constantly interrupted, their rest fragmented by the needs of family members or the demands of household chores. There was little opportunity for uninterrupted slumber. Furthermore, medical treatments for women's sleep issues were often intertwined with specific female ailments, which could range from vague hysteria to genuine reproductive health problems. Treatments might involve purges, specialized diets, or even the infamous wandering womb theory, all of which would contribute to stress rather than alleviate sleep problems. The medical gaze on women was often pathologizing, making it harder for their genuine sleep complaints to be addressed effectively. Ultimately, women's waking woes in the Renaissance were a testament to the immense burden placed upon them by society, their biology, and the limitations of medical knowledge. Their restless nights were not just a personal affliction, but a reflection of their demanding lives and the profound challenges they faced in a world that offered few avenues for genuine physical or mental repose. You are witnessing the silent, relentless struggle of half the population to find peace in the relentless darkness. As you reflect on the ceaseless demands placed upon Renaissance, women, you realize that despite all the potions, prayers, and peculiar pillows, there were still layers of discomfort and disruption within the sleeping environment itself that often went unaddressed. This brings us to the unseen sleep environment, exploring the hidden factors like pests and ventilation that profoundly impacted Renaissance sleep, often turning a struggle for rest into a battle against nature itself. Imagine settling into bed, perhaps hoping for a quiet moment, only to be met by a chorus of unseen antagonists. A mainstream historical fact is that basic sanitation and pest control, as we understand them today, were virtually non-existent in Renaissance homes, regardless of wealth. This meant that bedrooms, even the most opulent, were rarely truly clean or free from unwanted inhabitants. You'd feel the subtle prickle, the maddening itch, a persistent reminder that you were not alone in your bed or even in your hair. Sucker, beckon pests were ubiquitous. Fleas and bedbugs were constant companions, lurking in mattresses, bedding, and the very fabric of wooden bed frames. Imagine trying to fall asleep while being bitten repeatedly, the microscopic invaders making a meal of your skin. The itching would be incessant, making deep sleep virtually impossible, and often leading to irritated skin and secondary infections from scratching. You'd shift and scratch, swatting at unseen tormentors, turning your struggle for rest into a desperate silent battle against tiny, tenacious foes. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some folk remedies for bedbugs or fleas involved elaborate, often ineffective rituals. One might suggest placing a goose feather or a fish scale under the bed, believing these objects would magically repel the insects. Or even more bizarrely, hanging a piece of dried toad or snakeskin near the bed. Imagine the grim determination as you tucked a shriveled amphibian beneath your mattress, hoping its presence would scare away the blood-sucking hordes. It speaks to a profound desperation and a blend of practical, though misguided, and magical thinking. Historians still argue whether the constant presence of such pervasive pests contributed to a lower baseline of general health and chronic exhaustion in the Renaissance population, or if people developed a greater tolerance to these irritations than modern individuals might assume. Did the relentless itching and biting simply become part of the background noise of life? Or was it a constant, debilitating drain on energy and sleep? It's a debate about adaptation versus chronic stress. Ventilation was another significant yet often overlooked factor. Renaissance homes, especially those of the common folk, were typically poorly ventilated. Windows were often small, covered with shutters, or oiled paper glass was a luxury and rarely opened fully, especially in colder months, to conserve heat. This meant that the air inside could become stale, humid, and thick, with the odors of cooking, unwashed bodies, animals, and perhaps even the smoke from the hearth. You'd breathe in the heavy, unmoving air, feeling a slight stuffiness in your lungs, making it harder to drift off. The accumulation of dust, dirt, and mold within poorly ventilated and damp homes also contributed to respiratory issues, which in turn could disrupt sleep. Imagine suffering from a persistent cough or wheezing exacerbated by the very air you breathe in your sleeping quarters. This would undoubtedly lead to fragmented sleep, waking up frequently to cough or clear your airways. Furthermore, the presence of more domestic animals. Dogs, cats, and sometimes chickens, or even small livestock within the sleeping areas, particularly in poorer households, added to the noise odors and indeed the flea problem. Their movements, their sounds, and their excretions would all contribute to an environment less than conducive to restful slumber. You might find yourself sharing your sleeping space with a snuffling pig or a scratching dog, adding yet another layer of disturbance to your night. The lack of effective sanitation outside the home also meant that foul odors from overflowing privies, open sewers, or decaying refuse could easily waft through open windows or permeable walls, creating a truly repugnant sleeping environment. Imagine trying to find peace with the stench of human waste lingering in the air. Ultimately, the unseen aspects of the Renaissance sleep environment paint a vivid picture of constant, pervasive discomfort. Pests and poor ventilation weren't just minor irritations, they were fundamental antagonists to restful sleep, a silent, relentless assault on the body and mind. You are witnessing a time when true serenity in sleep was not just about internal calm, but about escaping the very tangible, often disgusting realities of your immediate surroundings. Having battled the unseen tormentors of pests and stale air, your Renaissance journey for sleep now takes an even more curious turn to the realm of more animal aids for slumber. You'll discover the bizarre, sometimes unsettling use of animal parts, and even the presence of live animals in attempts to induce sleep, blurring the lines between folk medicine, sympathetic magic, and sheer desperation. Imagine a rustic, perhaps slightly alarming remedy being prepared, a concoction involving parts of creatures you'd rather not encounter in your bedchamber. A mainstream historical fact is that Renaissance folk medicine and even some learned medical texts, particularly those influenced by ancient natural philosophy, incorporated a vast pharmacopoeia of animal-derived ingredients for various ailments, including sleep disorders. The belief was that the inherent qualities of an animal, its docility, its nocturnal habits, its very essence could be transferred to a human to induce similar effects. You'd find yourself contemplating the peculiar power supposedly held within a dried bird's foot or a prepared animal organ. One common, if unsettling, practice involved the use of dormice, sirwanarnawandin, or hare's himaranchum. These animals, known for their deep slumber or timid nature, were sometimes used in sympathetic magic. A quirky tidbit reveals that some believed that simply sleeping with a live dormouse or even a dried one in a small cage near your bed would magically draw its sleepy nature into your own being. Imagine trying to drift off, listening to the tiny scuffles of a captive rodent, hoping its natural tendency for hibernation would somehow rub off on you. Be quiet, little friend. We're both trying to sleep here. It's a bizarre form of animal-assisted therapy, Renaissance style. Historians still argue whether the perceived efficacy of these animal-based remedies was purely the result of strong placebo effects, or if the sheer strangeness of the ritual itself created a psychological distraction that temporarily alleviated anxiety, thus allowing sleep to occur. Was it the animal's essence or the profound human belief in that essence that truly brought a semblance of rest? It's a debate between magical thinking and the powerful, if often misunderstood, capacity of the human mind. Beyond live animals, their parts were frequently used. We briefly touched on the dried baked shower, bat's heart, germain, or mole's foot, under the pillow for luck and sleep. The mole, being a creature of darkness and stillness, was particularly favored. Imagine the preparation: carefully dissecting a small deceased mole, drying its foot, and then discreetly tucking it beneath your pillow, hoping its silent subterranean existence would manifest as deep, dreamless sleep for you. The ritual itself, the secretive nature of the preparation, would undoubtedly add to its perceived power. Another unsettling application involved concoctions made from animal brains or fats. For instance, bear fat was sometimes prescribed as an ointment to be rubbed on the body, believed to induce sleep due to the bear's long hibernation, or a paste made from the brain of a sleepy animal might be applied to the head. You'd feel the greasy, likely pungent balm being massaged into your scalp, trying not to think too hard about its origins, focusing only on the distant promise of unconsciousness. Some remedies even stretch to the aquatic realm. The electric ray torpedo fish was sometimes used not directly for sleep, but for its numbing properties. Its electric shock, if applied carefully, could induce a temporary stupor or unconsciousness, which some might have mistakenly interpreted as a form of restful sleep. Imagine a physician carefully handling a live electric ray, aiming its shock at a specific point on your body, all in the name of bringing you peace. This was an extreme and undoubtedly painful measure. The rationale behind these animal aids was deeply rooted in sympathetic magic and the prevailing belief that the macrocosm, the universe, reflected the microcosm, the human body. If an animal possessed a certain trait, then ingesting its parts or simply being near it could transfer that trait. It was a pre-scientific form of pharmacology based on observation and metaphorical association rather than chemical analysis. Ultimately, the use of animal aids for slumber highlights the boundless creativity and profound desperation of Renaissance individuals in their quest for sleep. When human remedies failed, and even the stars seemed indifferent, they turned to the animal kingdom, hoping to borrow a piece of its inherent tranquility. You are witnessing a time when the boundaries of what constituted medicine were far wider and far stranger than anything you might encounter today. With the faint, perhaps unsettling scent of animal remedies lingering in your mind, you now turn to another sensory pathway for inviting sleep, the power of sound. This leads us to music's ancient lullabies, where you'll learn about the specific musical forms and instruments believed to foster rest in Renaissance Europe and early intuitive understanding of music therapy. Imagine the gentle strumming of a lute, the soft trill of a recorder, or the hushed harmonies of voices from a nearby chamber. A mainstream historical fact is that music played a significant role in Renaissance society, not just for entertainment and religious ceremony, but also for its perceived therapeutic benefits. Physicians and philosophers drawing from ancient Greek theories of harmonia and ethos believed that music could directly influence the humors and emotions, making it a powerful tool for inducing calm and, by extension, sleep. You'd find yourself consciously listening, letting the melodies wash over you, hoping they would quiet the agitated hum of your thoughts. The type of music was crucial. Loud, vigorous, or discordant music was thought to agitate the spirit and exacerbate wakefulness. Conversely, soft, melancholic, or contemplative melodies were favored for inducing sleep. Instruments like the kiddie, lute, or mantorn, with its quiet, resonant, plucked strings, or the xiana, known for its gentle, sustained tones, were particularly recommended for evening performance. You might hear a gentle air or a pavane, played softly, their slow, regular rhythms mirroring the desired pace of the breath and heart. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some musical theorists of the Renaissance believed that specific musical modes or scales had direct physiological effects. For instance, the Narishkid or Dorian mode, and often associated with calmness and solemnity, might be prescribed for someone with a choleric, fiery temperament to induce a more balanced, sleep-conducive state. Imagine a musician adjusting their tuning not just for aesthetic appeal, but for therapeutic effect, explaining that this particular mode will cool your humors, good sir, and bring you peace. It highlights a fascinating belief in the almost alchemical power of organized sound. Historians still argue whether the perceived therapeutic effects of Renaissance music on sleep were purely psychosomatic, a result of cultural conditioning and the power of expectation, or if the specific frequencies and rhythms of certain musical compositions genuinely had a quantifiable impact on brainwave activity or heart rate. Did the brain genuinely slow its activity in response to a particular harmony, or did the belief in the music's power simply allow the listener to relax more effectively? It's a debate about the true physiological impact versus the profound influence of belief. Beyond instrumental music, vocal music, particularly gentle songs or even simple humming, was also employed. Lullabies, of course, have been sung for millennia, but in the Renaissance these were often highly stylized and sophisticated compositions, not just improvised tunes. The soft, repetitive singing of a familiar voice could be incredibly soothing, reminding the listener of safety and warmth. For the religious, the quiet chanting of psalms or vespers before bed might serve a similar purpose, their meditative quality drawing the mind away from worldly anxieties. The concept of harmony extended beyond just musical notes. It was believed that the harmony of the spheres, the celestial music produced by the movement of planets, was the ultimate calming influence. While obviously not audible, The idea of aligning oneself with this cosmic harmony through earthly music was a powerful philosophical concept that lent weight to music's therapeutic role. You might visualize the planets orbiting in silent, perfect harmony, hoping to draw down their tranquility into your own restless being. The practice of music for sleep was also linked to the idea of diverting the mind. Instead of battling agitated thoughts, directly gentle music offered a pleasant distraction, subtly drawing attention away from worries and towards a more peaceful, aesthetically pleasing experience. It was a form of gentle mental redirection, aiming to lull the active intellect into a state of receptive calm. You'd focus on the intricate patterns of the melody, letting them slowly untangle the knots in your mind. Ultimately, Renaissance music as a sleep aid demonstrates an intuitive grasp of the profound connection between sound emotion and the human psyche. Without modern neuroscience, they understood that certain auditory experiences could alter internal states, bringing solace to a troubled mind. You are witnessing a time when the invisible waves of sound were harnessed with deliberate intent, an ancient symphony composed not just for delight, but for the elusive promise of a good night's rest. You've traversed a fascinating, often unsettling landscape of Renaissance sleep aids, from potent poppies and screeching mandrakes to astrological charts and the unsettling silence of plague-ridden streets. We've explored the bizarre beliefs, the dangerous remedies, and the stark realities of a world constantly battling for rest. Now, in our final moments, you'll connect these ancient struggles to our contemporary understanding, contemplating modern sleep, ancient echoes, and recognizing the enduring human need for rest. Imagine stepping back into your own comfortable bedroom in the 21st century. The air is clean, the silence unbroken, save for the gentle hum of your air conditioner, and your mattress is a marvel of ergonomic design. Yet despite these comforts, the fundamental human struggle for sleep persists. A mainstream historical fact is that insomnia remains one of the most common health complaints, globally affecting a significant portion of the adult population. We may no longer rely on bloodletting or a mole's foot, but the underlying anxiety, stress, and physical discomforts that disrupt sleep are echoes of those faced by your Renaissance counterpart. The very concepts that plagued Renaissance minds' anxiety about the future, the impact of diet on digestion, the need for a quiet environment, are still discussed today, albeit with modern terminology. While we have neuroscience to explain circadian rhythms in sleep architecture and pharmacology, to offer targeted measured sleep aids, the experience of lying awake, your mind racing, is a timeless human condition. You might swap your mandrake wine for a melatonin supplement, but the deep-seated yearning for oblivion is strikingly similar. Now, for a quirky tidbit, while we no longer consult astrologers for sleep schedules, the burgeoning field of chronobiology explores how natural light cycles and even lunar phases might still subtly influence human sleep, perhaps more than we consciously realize. Some studies suggest a slight delay in sleep onset or reduced sleep duration around full moons, a faint scientifically observed echo of ancient lunar beliefs. Imagine, after all our scientific progress, that the moon might still be keeping us awake just as it did your Renaissance ancestors. Historians still argue whether the nature of sleep has truly changed fundamentally, or if our modern perception of perfect sleep, an uninterrupted 8 hours, is a culturally constructed ideal that makes us feel more insomniac than previous generations who may have accepted fragmented sleep as normal. Are we genuinely sleeping less and worse, or are our expectations simply higher, making us more keenly aware of its absence? It's a profound debate about historical comparison and the evolution of human experience. Consider the remedies. Instead of volatile opium tinctures, you have precisely dosed benzodiazepines or Z-drugs. Instead of a witch's charm, you might have a meditation app playing white noise. The tools have changed, but the fundamental goal of calming the nervous system, reducing anxiety, and inducing unconsciousness remains identical. The Renaissance pursuit of sensory soothers, from the quiet lute to calming balms, finds its modern parallel in aromatherapy, sound machines, and weighted blankets. We are still in many ways seeking the same peace through different means. The communal aspect of Renaissance sleep, often born of necessity, contrasts sharply with our modern ideal of individual private bedrooms. Yet even today, loneliness, or the presence of a restless partner, can disrupt sleep, showing that the human need for both connection and personal space remains a delicate balance. The historical context of shared sleeping spaces makes you appreciate the simple luxury of having your own quiet room. Ultimately, the secret sleep aids of Renaissance Europe weren't always effective, and they were often dangerous. But they were born from the same fundamental human vulnerability to sleeplessness that we experience today. They remind us that the human need for rest is primal, enduring, and ceaselessly sought across centuries and cultures. The quiet moments before sleep are a sacred space, whether you're easing into a feather bed in a Florentine palazzo or clicking off your smart lamp in a modern apartment. As you drift towards your own rest tonight, remember the quiet struggles of those who came before you. Feel the vast, unbroken chain of humanity, all striving for that same elusive peace. The world may have changed beyond recognition, but the silent, profound longing for restful slumber remains a constant ancient echo in the modern night. Sweet dreams.